do a we would meet again and do a recapitulation of everything. And also, I'm still working on these provisional propositions, and I'm going to work with Arto a little bit over the break, and we may have put it out to you guys. And I'm thinking, if everybody is good with this date, tentatively speaking, but I think it works, the 17th of January, we can meet again, if that's okay. Yeah, on a Wednesday, same time. We can do, yeah, not a problem for me. I don't think for Arto either. So yeah, so 5 o'clock, we'll put out the word and also send along some documentation, etc. I mean, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, as everybody probably knows, that Tony Negri passed away at 90 years old last week. We have pretty good connections to Tony Negri over the years. Many people, including Sandro Mazzaro, who was kind of like, one of the closest friends of Negri, worked with him often. Of course, Bruno Gulli had met with Negri back in the day. They were not close, but they actually did meet. Stanley met Negri in Venice late, and I think I said the story that Stanley's False Promises was translated into Italian by Carlo Gambino during the 1970s, and it circulated among the group of which Negri was in, and part of Workers' Power, was studying Aronowitz's work on in False Promises, the shaping of the working class in America. So there's a long history. We have friends now, Matteo Pollinari, who's basically calls Tony grandpa. They're very close, etc. And I just want to say that, vis-a-vis Agamben and Negri were very close. They split. They had that falling out. But it's my understanding, I'm going to try to get it translated, and I'll share it with the group, that Agamben wrote an absolutely beautiful eulogy for Negri, in a sense. And you get the sense of this power, if you will, of ideas in Europe especially, and especially in Italy and France and the Latin countries, if you will, that they're just have this really deep-seated level of friendship, despite, political differences, despite different paths, etc. I do not consider Agamben a liberal or a reactionary in any way. He's certainly not a Marxist. There's no question about that. He is not an imaginative Marxist like I would call Negri. Now, I don't really think Negri is so much only in the Western Marxism tradition, as some people like to label it these days. Negri was one of the more imaginative thinkers out there, for a very long period. He wrote 3 books on Spinoza in jail. He spent 6 years of his life imprisoned, on trumped up charges, if you will. He went to serve his time from Paris, by the way, in order to free his comrades. That was part of the plea bargain, that he would go serve his sentence and they would release some of his friends. Some of his people out there today working is Maurizio Lazzarato, who was both a very close friend of Negri's and took courses with Gilles Deleuze. Of course, Guattari of the Anti-Oedipus and then Social Ecology and Regime of Madness fame was very close with Negri. And again, I emphasize that sometimes these notions, I mean, Tony Negri never really engaged, if you will, Agamben hardly ever engaged, Marxism towards the end of his, the last 25, 30 years of his trajectory. And again, it goes way back to Negri, Agamben, Massimo Cacciari. I don't know if you know that name. He was the communist mayor of Venice, and wrote a couple of good books on the common, and very interesting stuff. So anyway, all to say, to my mind, if you're interested in picking up on Negri, and I feel it's certainly my radical duty to present, the book on insurgency is a masterpiece, in my opinion, which is a very great attempt to look at modernity and the conceptual formation from Oceana of Harrington through Hobbes, through Rousseau, through Locke, through Hegel, through Marx to Lenin and a little bit beyond, also with theses for revolution. It's really a great introduction to Negri's thought. The other book that is very impressive and very original to me was the work on Spinoza, the first book that he wrote, Savage Analomy. If you're interested and have read any of the ethics or any of the political treatises, this is again a real contribution both to Spinoza's radicality and outside the box of academia, but also a contribution to scholarship. And he was able to do both. He was so good at that. This was one of Tony Negri's great abilities to dance that line. So again, I emphasize this, and of course his earlier work on the planner state, very interesting, since this Nazi moment, the imperialism picked up on the planner state with Keynes. The Germans had their people, as we learn more and more from Foucault and Agamben. Tonight's one of the figures is Hans Reiter on medicine. I hope Beth read that chapter on the giving form to life, because it's really on the medical practices of the state and how the National Socialists see it. And we certainly can see remnants of that today, even though we've gone through, free to obey in modern management techniques. So anyway, all to say, again, I'm moving towards, I know we're somewhat resistant at certain times to Agamben. He's very abstract. He makes extremely hyperbolic claims throughout. But in the same way, I think it's very important to take him seriously. This is a major thinker in our times. Again, agree or disagree. He is someone who is, I would call him, a very intelligent fellow traveler when the chips are really down. In a way, he's not someone that's going to shirk from the foxhole, if you will. When the chips are really down. And thinking through stuff. And as we mentioned last week, refusal to come to the United States ever since the Patriot Act. Refusal to step in the United States. So I admire that too, especially with all these people that come in and get the big money as these quote European stars or this kind of thing. Agamben could command very hefty sums. He does not. Etc. So anyway, again, I'll certainly miss Negri. We plan to write a little something for Situations in his honor. I don't know how many of you have read Negri. I know everybody's heard of him, but to my mind, he's really worth reading. Patrick, he also did a book on Descartes. I don't know if you know that book. Political Descartes, really worth reading. He situates Cartesian doubt and the discourse on the method and the rules for the direction of mind in the manufacturing era of capital. Yeah, so very interesting. Okay, I have an anarchist friend from Montreal who's joining us tonight. Okay, I just noticed. Okay, so yeah, good. So yeah. So maybe we could begin confusions or any thoughts about the Agamben. Again, I find it extremely provocative. The camp, as the nomos of our time, as the biological paradigm. This chapter 7 in particular, the camp as nomos. Of course, nomos means law, convention, and custom in Greek. That's where it comes from. The nomos. The root word is nem, which is also used in nomadic thought as well, the nomad thought of Gilles Deleuze. And, but I thought we had some very interesting things, the human guinea pigs, politics are giving form to life, and then also politicizing death, and then ending up with the camp as nomos. So, I'd love to hear from you, in a lot of ways. I highlighted some what I considered crucial passages. Again, I'm always amazed about Agamben and Foucault, their ability to read archives and then rethink it, right, in a chapter. So this is really the beginning of a text called State and Health. This is on page 144, Politics or Giving Form to the Life of a People. And how he begins with Hans Reiter in particular, and this writing of this document, State and Health, and that the Nazi project was not only eugenic and not only biological racism, but much more. And Agamben seems to be going there in this chapter. And then, of course, the next chapter on the human guinea pigs, the what are called, the very, the Versuchspersonen, in German, the human guinea pigs, right? And how this worked in terms of experimentation, et cetera. Well, I mean, we know this well in the United States, of course, through the Tuskegee experiments, and we know it very well in many other moments, including the putting of crack cocaine in ghettoized areas to finance the Contra rebellions in the 1980s and against Nicaragua, the Contra, revolutionaries. And so anyway, and then how death becomes politicized, and then the nomos of the modern, the law of the modern, the camp itself. And of course, I just, watched, my news source has been Al Jazeera on this situation in Gaza. I think they've been the most, the major dominant media, the best on the ground by far. Today, they almost lost another reporter. The hospital was hit behind him, and he had to, take shelter. He continued to report. So 3 drones, airborne drones, hit right behind the hospital, while he was reporting. So we've seen many scenes like that, and we know all the horror stories. But then the thing is how do we think this through in terms of the city being replaced? I think this is a radical notion. I'm not saying, that he's got the end all to be all claim here, but certainly worth considering how the camp as both an idea and as a practice replaces the city, right? As the law or the convention of our time, or better put, probably norm, right? The norm, how the norm is created in a way. Very much like Gramsci's Common Sense, how norms are created and then how ideas become socialized to where we ultimately take this for granted, right? So this is very interesting to me too. And so anyway, I mean, I'll open it. Arto, some things to say. I know the Agamben makes comments about he puts together in some ways National Socialism and Stalinism, and I think that's bad. It's not smart in my opinion at times, but he is kind of looking at this through again the politics of I guess Homo Sacer, how this works in terms of his own thesis. So we can certainly discuss this. And by the way, one counterweight to this is the second volume. I'm going to be teaching the Critique of Dialectical Reason in late January, early February. The second volume is basically Sartre's attempt to dismantle totalitarianism and also give a very different voice to the necessity of Stalinism in terms of revolutionary practice. So there are a lot of arguments in this among at least the European thinkers about this. So anyway, Arto, any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting. I'm still kind of digesting it because I'm reading this part in Agamben for the first time, but I feel like the label totalitarianism, the sense that I have, certainly makes sense when it comes to studying liberal societies, but even more so National Socialism, precisely because of what Agamben says, when he notes that the political is the biological and vice versa. And to me, it seems like it's a different way of saying what Foucault said: the politics is the continuation of war through other means. And the reverse. But when you say politics is the same as the biological in the minds of the Nazis, their way of thinking, imagining the political, that's the totalizing aspect, right? In the sense that you flatten, once you remove political struggle, once you remove class struggle, and the inherent openness that leaves because of the Hegelian dialectical logic of that framework where there's a spiral, overcoming contradictions, persisting through the tension of the contradiction in everyday life is politics, right? In the Marxist tradition, revolutionary Marxist tradition,
Right.
not the academic Marxist tradition, as we always try to say, but the Hegelian, the dialectical logic used as an organon, as a tool for making sense of everyday life, suggests that totalitarianism is impossible in a society where the biological is not isomorphic or is not fused in meaning with the political. So in any society where there's active class struggle being waged from the point of view of the dominant political forces, whether they control the state or whatnot, it's not possible to have a totalitarian. The label totalitarianism doesn't apply, I think, to that, to societies where class struggle is active, where in a society where class struggle has been flattened or has been suspended, like in Nazi Germany. Of course, there was class struggle. I mean, the Hitler obviously was the right wing of, if we want to use those words, he was the right wing in the Nazi party, right? The left wing was the Strasser, movement, which was killed off in the Night of the Long Knives. But once you suspend the class struggle and you force your attention to race struggle, then you're in the terrain of biopolitical proper, seems like, and in the terrain of totalizing politics. The political is now fused with the biological, and all of a sudden you have lack of movement. You have lack of motion in politics. You're in the stage of, yes, you're in the stage of permanent civil war, which suggests class conflict, but it's not. You're saying genetics predetermines the political. So somebody born with a genetic flaw in the Nazi language must be eliminated from society. They must be prevented from reproducing. So you introduce eugenics, which is the under major kind of operational aspect of Nazi politics or any racist politics. But once you do that, you're basically in a particular kind of static way of looking at life. Genetics predetermines the social, and then what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that once you exterminate the flawed people within you, once you perform eugenics, or once you perform succeeding rounds of genocidal killings, and you purge the organism of the body of the race, even though, interestingly, Agamben says both Hitler and the senior Nazi legal theorists understood that there's no such a thing as a pure race. Right. So there's a contradiction within the Nazi project as well. They understand that the pure race is an ideal, or it's some kind of a construct in order to justify particular political operations within society. But the idea that you collapse the biological with the political at the expense of eliminating political conflict itself, by eliminating the notion of class struggle, I think puts you in the totalitarian camp. Whereas, just to make the point briefly, the Stalinist approach was extreme class conflict to the point of causing grave damage to the political party itself, to the Communist Party itself, right, within or through this process, not by Stalin as much as by the opponents of that faction, right? So I don't think the totalitarian label makes sense at all when we apply it to societies of radical class conflict, no matter what its outcomes are, whether the outcomes are the reconstitution of capitalism, as Trotsky anticipated. And, he said, look, one of the dangers we face in the Soviet Union is that the party might become the new class. It might become a caste and then a new class. Stalin, of course, understood this as well. He said, as soon as I die, they're going to start fighting for the piece of, the economic pieces, and then they'll probably reconstitute the capitalists. They become the capitalists. That's the inherent danger of the revolutionary movement, but that's a danger that China has avoided so far.
Yes.
Whereas I think the label of totalizing, maybe not totalitarian, but totalizing political formations like the Nazis, and I also think by liberal societies, as Foucault indicated too, which a liberal society actively suffocates the political, through the domain of narrow self-interest, et cetera. I think Agamben's point, if for me personally, if I take the caveat of the equivocation of Stalinism with or whatever Stalinism means. Stalinism essentially means, if we ask Fursov and other serious students of the Russian Revolution, Stalinism is basically the political victory of the nation state, or the state grounded faction of the communists within the Soviet Communist Party, versus the internationalist oriented member faction of the Soviet Communist Party.
Right,
This is
right.
the same struggle that exists in the Chinese party as well, where
Right.
Comrade C, as we understand, is grounded within the state, i.e., he's within this, if we want to use the language of classical political theory, he's in the language of the Hobbesian world, right? He's doing the dominant faction in China, as I understand it now, to use this language that Agamben and Foucault are suggesting, are in the Hobbesian kind of statist, for better or worse, versus the liberal kind of energy of the anti-statist, radical individual capitalist logic of self-interest. So I think in that sense, this was an interesting point in Agamben to teach us about a different look at what was the essence, the revolutionary essence of Nazism, different from Frito Bay, which focused on a different but related aspect of kind of control of populations through the art of management. Here it's control of reshaping of the political field itself, which is a war waged through other means, through the collapse of the political as the biological, and its inversion, the biological as the political. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because it's, first of all, it's empirically true, as we know from the Nazi political experience, but it's also empirically true in our own time, right? When this whole thing about biopolitics, liberal societies too, as well, collapse perhaps the political with the biological.
Right. If I could, just go to the text for a second, because I think this is a very central document to what we're talking about, is this Hans Reiter, The State and Health, which was written in 1942. This is at the beginning of section 4 of part 3, Agamben, page 144 in the Stanford edition. And it bears the significant title, State and Health. I'm going to go on to the second page, and this is interesting. I won't read all of what he says. You certainly can read it for Schuker, State and Health. He writes, according to Reiter, the great novelty of National Socialism lies in the fact, this is 145, that this living wealth now enters the foreground of the Reich's interest and calculation, right? Interest in calculations, founding a new politics. This politics begins, first of all, with the establishment of, quote, a budget to take account of the living value of people, right? And it proposes to assume the care of, quote, the biological body of the nation. We are approaching a logical synthesis of biology and economy, right? Very interesting. Politics will more and more have to be capable as achieving this synthesis, which may be only in the first stages today, but which still allows one to recognize the interdependence of the forces of biology and economy as an inevitable fact. Hence, the radical transformation and the duties of medicine. Very interesting, I think, one.
And the meaning of medicine.
The meaning of medicine. I'm sorry. Transformation of the meaning, and duties of medicine, which is increasingly integrated into the functions and the organs of the state. Again, he quotes, just as the economist and the merchant are responsible for the economy of material values, the physician is responsible for the economy of human values. Very interesting here, the way this is. It is absolutely necessary that the physician contribute to a rationalized emphasis, human economy, that he recognizes that the level of people's health is the condition for economic gain. Fluctuations in the biological substance and in the material budget are usually parallel. Hence the whole thing of studies in depression and economy that have gone on. I remember a man named Brenner at Johns Hopkins who did work like that I did. I spent about 3 weeks doing research for that. Back in the 70s, where they were looking at fluctuations in the economy and rates of depression, et cetera. It was an empirical study. So the principles of this new biopolitics are dictated by eugenics. Going back full circle now to where we were, which is understood as the science of a people's genetic hereditary. Foucault has documented, and this to me is really where it becomes interesting, the increasing importance that the science of police, the Polizeiwissenschaften from the Germans, right, this police sciences, assumes starting in the 18th century when with Nicolas Desmarets, Johann Peter Frank, and H.G. von Giusti, it takes its explicit objective the total care of the population, right? And from the end of the 19th century, Galton's work that we all know functions as the theoretical background for the work of the science of police, which by now becomes biopolitics. So he's really looking at a different, another moment in this birth of the biopolitical, right? It is important to observe that Nazism, contrary to a common prejudice, did not limit itself to using and twisting scientific concepts for its own ends. The relationship between National Socialist ideology and the social and biological sciences of the time, in particular genetics, is much more intimate and complex, and at the same time more disturbing. A glance at the contributions of Versucher, who surprisingly, as may seem, continued to teach genetics and anthropology at the University of Frankfurt even after the fall of the Third Reich, and Fischer, the director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology in Berlin, shows beyond a doubt that the genetic research of the time, which had been recently discovered, the localization of genes and chromosomes, those genes that are ordered, as Fischer writes, like pearls in a necklace. Yeah, this is very interesting, right? Pearls gave National Socialist biopolitics its fundamental conceptual structure. Race, Fischer writes, is not determined by the assembly of this or that measurable characteristic, as is in the case, for example, of a scale of colors. Race is genetic hereditary and nothing but hereditary. It is not surprising, therefore, that the exemplary reference studies for both Versucher and Fischer are Morgan and Haldane's experiments on Drosophila and more generally the very same works of Anglo-Saxon genetics that led during the same years to the formation of the first map of the X chromosome in man and the first certain identification of hereditary pathological predispositions. By the way, J.B.S. Haldane is a translator of Hegel, a Hegelian, and also known as an English Marxist. Yeah. For those of you who don't know the name. So the new fact, however, is that these concepts are not treated as external binding criteria of the sovereign decision. They are rather, as such, immediately political. Thus, the concept of race is defined in accordance with the genetic theories of the age as a group of homozygotic genes that are lacking in other groups. Yet both Fischer and Versucher know that a pure race is, according to, almost impossible, as Arto was pointing out, to identify, and particularly neither the Jews nor the Germans constitute a race in the strict sense. And Hitler is just aware of this when he writes in Mein Kampf, when he decides on the final solution. Racism, and this is Hitler speaking, if one understands race to be a strictly biological concept, is therefore not the most correct term for the biopolitics of the Third Reich. National Socialist biopolitics moves instead in a horizon in which the care of life inherited from the 18th century police sciences is now being formed on properly eugenic concerns absolutized. Distinguishing between politics and police, von Giusti assigned the first a merely negative task, the fight against external and internal enemies of the state, and the second one, the positive task, the care and growth of the citizen's life. Yeah, in many ways, right? So, yeah. Anyway, the National Socialist biopolitics, and along with it, a good part of modern politics, even outside the Third Reich, cannot be grasped if it is not understood as necessarily implying the disappearance of the difference between the two terms. The police now become politics, and the care of life coincides with the fight against the enemy. The National Socialist Revolution, one reads in the beginning to State and Health, wishes to appeal to forces that want to exclude factors of biological degeneration and to maintain the people's hereditary health. In this, it thus aims to fortify the health of the people as a whole and to eliminate influences that harm the biological growth of the nation. The book does not discuss problems that concern only one people. It brings out problems of vital importance for all European civilization. Only from this perspective is it possible to grasp the full sense of the extermination of the Jews, in which the police and politics, eugenic motives and ideological motives, the care of health, and the fight against the enemy becomes absolutely indistinguishable. To me, this all sounds all too familiar in what we're getting today. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, any thought? I mean, this is the beginning of State and Health. A work of 41. Yeah.
And also the disappearance of the political as understood by some of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, and the entire Aristotelian tradition has been completely thrown out.
Right.
In a way that's related but different from the liberal way through which they neuter the political too. And also, did people feel that this whole idea, this great phrase of on page 2, at the top, the living wealth, right? And the fact that this living wealth now enters the Reich's direct interest, that sounds also very familiar to what the University of Chicago economist
Froze up for
Becker,
a second. Is that, yeah. Whoops.
Can you hear it? Michael? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I mean, I don't know what happened.
So this whole thing about living wealth, it sounds also very familiar in terms of the work done by Becker in the Chicago School on the notion of human capital, that everybody possesses wealth within their own being, within their own selves, and it's just a matter of using it appropriately to one's own advantage. So like that's the liberal version of this care for the self as the ground of the political, right? So it's very interesting. So once you say that the political has now become one with the police, politics has now become one with policing and vice versa. I thought that's right. So are we there today still, or are we moving on to even?
No. It's very good. I mean, I want to just say in Foucault's case, those of you that have read The Order of Things or Words and Things more literally from the French, at the end, he talks about the three disciplines that are crucial for our epoch. And in some ways, you're right, Arto, he is displacing class struggle, right, in a way, because he says we reduce it to three disciplines in our time: labor, life, political economy, life, biology, right, and linguistics, language. So the triad in which we're working here, both I think in Foucault and in Agamben, is this moment of, the biopolitical is this combination of life, political economy, and then, something that you could call reading the discursive regularities, in these documents, reading the archive through discursive, not only contradiction, but regularities that are happening. So to go back to a document like State and Health and see the formation in which you pick up I think very accurately, the relationship to the Chicago School of Economics. Yeah, very, very interesting. That we can see human capital developing out of this as living wealth, and this mixture of the biological and the economic, right? Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, it seems easy to continue thinking of the political through class struggle while fully integrating, Foucault's fundamental categories of thinking the political through labor, biology, and linguistics. Then is just the question has to be the political fight through the notion of the class struggle is about the singular versus, I guess they're old Hegelian categories, but they're inescapable, right? It's It's the struggle between the singular and the individual interest versus that which is common to all.
Right.
And which could be put up for discussion. I mean, is the common to all a significant political category to worry about as we imagine a better, or whatever word we want to use, a more satisfying or good life, good living, more egalitarian, more democratic, right? What happens if you abandon willingly the political category of the common to all, which is the universal, right? In English, it's the universal, which I think hides the meaning, which I know in Russian it's translated as that which is commonly held, or that which is common to all.
No.
If that category is abandoned, I mean, the Nazis don't abandon it. They use it much more ideologically, or maybe they use it, to them, the common to all is, of course, the race, the category of the race, even though they understand that Jewish Germans are also contributing to that which is common to all, because there's no such thing as a pure race, probably because of human imperfections, and people might have sex with others from the inferior races or whatever, and thus this is always going to be part of the battle. But once we abandon the notion of that which is common to all, which is an Aristotelian category too, because what is in Aristotle's Politics, what is his main, he asks this question. He says, what comes first, the individual or society? And his answer is the society comes first, because that which is common to all comes first, is the condition for the existence of the individual, first of all, because no baby, I mean, he kind of implies, right? No baby, no newborn can ever be viably able to survive, to reach adulthood on its own, right? So we're born into already existing, commonly held things which make life possible, because no individual can ever, Aristotle says, ever achieve self-sufficiency on their own. It's literally impossible, right? Because of the complexity of the human existence and human life, and what confronts us once we're born and living on this planet. The social precedes the individual. So that's Aristotle's position, which is, of course, Marxist position, and that's the communist position in that tradition. The Nazis, of course, seem to also agree with that the social comes before the individual, but they go do it through this strange category of the strange to, I guess, people like people working in the Marxist tradition, category of race. The liberals reject it out of hand. So we have this in here. We have the major debates that we're confronted with today as well. What happens when you abolish or reject the category of the social, or in other words, that which is common to all? You're either left with Nazi politics, or you're left with liberal politics, with all the consequences, which we empirically now know in both cases. So I wonder if the socialized cybernetic approach is an attempt to resolve the horrific side effects of creating a society where there's no politics, where there's no society. And maybe the socialized, maybe the digital social objects that are being created now, these cybernetic objects that have simulated human capabilities, maybe that's going to be the missing social that liberal society needs to create in order for it not to self-destruct into total meaninglessness and internal and external war. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, I mean, I've been doing, I'm writing this thing on some provisional propositions for the Homo datum, if you will, or the cybernetic revolution, and what it's produced, is that, Bateson did not believe in the interior life at all. This was something, this is one of the reasons that behaviorism, right, took the forefront around and now cognitive therapy has taken the place of, if you will, psychoanalysis, right, or any kind of depth psychology. The cyberneticians, including Bateson and Wiener, did not believe in the inner life at all. There is no soul. right, if you will. I mean, does the soul itself have any meaning, the psyche anymore, right? In a sense. And this is very dangerous. As I mentioned last time, and Patrick will appreciate this, people like Merleau-Ponty don't write a book on the structure of behavior just because they're interested in behavioral manifestation. There's stakes in the world. B.F. Skinner at that time, Watson, the entire Harvard School of Psychology, which, by the way, did speak to the inferiority of blacks, the APA, which is putting a rubber stamp on this. So this has a a long history in terms of, where we are and how we got to this in a sense, right? And yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, this is set up, if you want to use a Marxian vocabulary, yes, of course, new social relations of production, right? New relations of production are doing something very different, right? Under this, radical shift because of the internet highway in '92, and certainly post-World War II. It's all in the planning. I mean, the military is behind the internet. It's basically ultimately a command structure they'll use in the event of an internet attack. They have all kinds of planning that's going on about
Nuclear attack, you mean?
Yeah, nuclear attack. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, but that's interesting, Michael, because
Yeah.
we know since Galileo's proposition that anything that the human mind can imagine mathematically,
Yes.
right, or anything in that which is perceived by human beings can be captured through human mathematics, right? And so capitalism, of course, uses that Galilean science in order to, it harnesses that power, right? As we well know. So, and the cyberneticians, when they say that they reject inner life or the soul or the metaphysical aspect of the human, or, the notion that love is a thing that you can't very easily formalize and whatever. So what do? They basically, those early theoreticians you mentioned, they basically agreed in their conferences in the 50s,
Right.
And early 60s, they agreed that all of the things that cannot be accurately captured by mathematical modeling are irrelevant. They just made that decision, whether they believed in it or not. They had to do it because otherwise the entire project of treating the human mind and human consciousness and everything else as simply through the models of electronic computers,
Right.
These kinds of input and output machines that perform some kind of a very specific non-dialectical logic, formal mathematical logic. In order for those machines to actually be implemented as metaphors, and as also later on as political ideology and political theory, they had to throw out or suspend big chunks of the human experience, such as, inner life or the soul, or even language. Remember, were those phrases that Bates and all these people said that human language has certain imperfections which are terribly flawed, and they're a barrier for our movement forward as humans, right? That language is vague. Language has multiple meanings. Language as used by people is not precise enough. It can mean many different things. These are insurmountable problems for math. Now, of course, somebody will say, well, ChatGPT or contemporary cybernetics has solved that problem because you can communicate with computers using natural language. But that's just simulated conversations. The only reason why ChatGPT or whatever, or simulated human intelligence, can provide you with answers to your questions that seem as if they're written by other people is because they're simply stitching together vast databases of already created human statements and knowledge and language, phrases, and et cetera, and mathematics and whatever. So artificial intelligence as it exists today is nothing but a very sophisticated search engine with the ability to stitch together through plagiarizing, essentially, unless they explicitly cite everything that, things that are already the human mind created. Mm-hmm. Right? It's a very big question to say that, huge language models today is used by software, platforms to produce artificial intelligence. Do they have the ability to take the plunge into the unknown in terms of the creative, in terms of the, the kind of thinking that led Einstein to E = mc squared with the trams and the clock towers and whatever? Of course it cannot, because it's not a sentient being. It could simulate it. It could arrive at results that can be interpreted by people as originary, but They certainly are not. They certainly are not. They only appear so to people who don't know how those things are produced and how they work. Uh, and that's a very interesting conversation to be had. But you're right. Michael's point is very central. That needs to be like worked on further. Cybernetics doesn't believe in inner life of humans. That throws out a lot of fundamental importance to what makes people people. And that's not really, that's almost like assumed to be true by modern positivists, and they don't even talk about it. And it's like,
Yeah.
you
What's
know,
killed is experience, really. And I mean, in a sense, Erfahrung, which was very dear to Heidegger, the experience, right? Very dear to Adorno. I mean, the negative dialectic, the dialectic, negative dialectic is supposed to move in its negativity all the way to the extreme in order to produce the subject again, the subject of experience. That's the moment of pushing the dialectic to the extreme, right?
right.
Push the
And
contradictions all the way, the negation of the negation and the Hegelian corpus, the series of the multiplicity of determinate negations, to push to the point where there's nothing left, right? Except
right.
experience, right? The same thing with Heidegger, this kind of destruction of, positive destruction of Western ontology that led to this, right? That he so, ambitiously tries to rewrite. Yeah, but please go
No,
ahead.
this is very true, Michael. And I remember this phrase by the Soviet philosopher Ilenkov. He said he had a battle against positivists in his day in the 60s and 70s. He said, modern cybernetics is a beautiful thing, but let's think about it really hard and use it in the most appropriate way to further human life, to further, rather than use it as a crutch to replace,
Right.
to declare the human mind a limited computer that we can overstep and expand with human created artificial computers that can be smarter, But he said, I remember he had a passage in one of his works about dialectics trying to explain it, right? The fundamental thing that happens when we're thinking through the Hegelian, Aristotelian, Marxist dialectical logic senses, you arrive at a situation where you encounter a contradiction. Whether you're doing science, whether you're writing a poem, whether you're trying to do your job and you encounter a contradiction. What does that mean? Ilenkov says encountering a contradiction means you've encountered a situation where you realized that you don't know how to do something. You've encountered a limit condition. I don't have the answer to this predicament that I'm in. You realize that through the internal loop, what Vygotsky would say, the inner voices are activated, your mind. You're having a conversation with yourself, and you're like, I've encountered a situation for which I have no answers. I don't know how to think about it. I don't know what to do. It makes no sense, but I need to figure it out. Where does that I need to figure it out comes from? That's a conscious decision. But the point is, the starting point on overcoming the contradiction is, I don't know how to overcome this. And precisely at that moment, you unlock the most beautiful thing about what it means to be human in that framework, which is, how do I figure this out? And you're moving beyond the contradiction when you have to invent a whole series of things could either lead you to overcoming the contradiction, or it could lead you to a dead end, or some state in between where you have a perhaps incorrect or unsatisfying or a compromised way of stepping over that which is which you know and that which you don't know. These are fundamental human things. Why would you at that point delegate to a human created machine? Why would you delegate to a human created machine instead of like Patrick says, instead of using the machine perhaps as a sophisticated stochastic aid, you are going to use the machine as to parrot back some answers which may help you go through it. Okay, yes, we can use the artificial intelligence machinery to overcome a contradiction. That would be an appropriate use of these very powerful human created simulated intelligences. But only if we persist through the horrific tension or exhilarating tension where you suffer for minutes, days, years, depending on the nature of your problem, constantly realizing that you don't know something that you would love to know, but you're not certain how to get there. So you have to invent systems of thinking, you have to invent scientific apparatuses, you have to invent new ways of writing music, you have to invent new ways of dancing, new ways of thinking about how you're going to die, whatever it is. Why would you want to give that up for formal mathematical logic, which you can do, but why would you want to give up the dialectical logic? I think socialized cybernetics is incredibly impoverished when it gives up dialectical logic or the notion of the contradiction as the fundamental point that you need to reach in your way of solving a problem.
It's also impoverished in the sense that, you look at the young people today, all due respect to you, Tyrese, I'm glad you're here, and Sebastian, anyway, the rest of us are at least can not be trusted. We're a little bit over 30, but anyway, the idea is, look, I went to work even though I came from, a semi, affluent, not highly affluent, but semi-affluent family when I was 13 years old. I had summer jobs where I was picking up stuff. I was learning responsibility. Now everything is very prolonged dependency. The first job for most people is after college, the living at home, this total lack of being able to take control of things. So basically a whole generation, or maybe two generations, depending on how we date this, are really unable to face responsibility. They're sitting ducks, they're marks, if you will, in the Burroughs sense, for the cybernetic to become these socialized objects. They are digital to the system in a sense, right? So this lack of interiority, this lack of experience has produced a group of quote unquote people, humans that are only planned for, right? Have no idea of what's going down in a way. Hence why we don't have major student movements, although right now there's so many issues out there that are pressing concerns. We have no real student movements. There's no activity on the campuses. A few demonstrations here or there, a few protests, a few strikes, but in general, no movement of any kind, in a way. Yeah. So you have to ask this question. What is happening when you don't really have experience, right? It just becomes surface. How to cook, that's great. Isn't that awesome? Taylor Smith, woman of the year, whoa, man of the year, right? Whoa, Travis Kelce, for those of you who know a little bit about this popular culture item, But I mean, think about this. You listen to these lyrics, I mean, they're infantile, to put it mildly. And I mean, this is the biggest thing going here. I mean, one stanza of Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash say more in one sentence than this woman has said in her whole career. I mean, it's unbelievable the regression, right? And it's not in the service of the ego because the ego has not been built. It's just regression, as you were saying earlier, Arto, about Galilean mathematics. It's a regression analysis which has no limit in some ways, as long as consumption continues. So I think this is I mean, again, something we really have to retain, this thing about this lack of experience, lack of interiority, and it also manifests itself in the inability to read. The inability to retain. Or Kristen's not here tonight. I know she's interested in the attention economy. What has this done to the attention spans, the attention economies as well? So this is all a question of these new generative symptoms that we have no idea about how to, as starting points, what to do about. It's yeah. In many ways.
I mean,
but please, go ahead. I mean, yeah.
So just to try to think about these categories, I mean, so what does it mean to say if the shortcomings of the way socialized cybernetics is thinking about the world in human being is this over-reliance on formal logic, formalized, mathematical logic in that sense, the idea that the problem has a correct answer. So you can test a particular scientific theory we know from Descartes' method, eliminating uncertainty as much as possible until you arrive at the most plausible solution. So it's a battle against uncertainty, right? And then, of course, we have, somebody might say, yeah, but modern science, going back to Patrick's phrase, can be comfortable with uncertainty in its results. It can deploy probabilistic distributions which substitute some kind of a definitive, discrete truth, right? So we can say, well, modern physics, quantum mechanics can only produce and suggest approximations, right, as its truth. So how is that different from dialectical logic, that where that remains true, right? Dialectical logic is, so I was thinking, like, maybe we can differentiate formal cybernetic logic or formal cybernetic reasoning from its negation, if we want to call it dialectical or creative thought or whatever we want, or just thinking. But maybe we can propose that dialectical or creative thinking is a way of thinking or a way of being that is oriented towards uncertain answers that are not uncertain through probabilistic reasoning, but they're uncertain because of some kind of a non, as of yet, mathematically capturable yearning, feeling, some kind of a more preconscious, perhaps, or I don't know what the words are, but there's definitely a difference between formal reasoning and the dialectical approach, if we want to still use that word. And it's resolved, I think it hinges over this question of certainty versus uncertainty, and the uncertainty being not something that's capturable through stochastic methods. Well, what is it? And I think that's what Heidegger was asking us, among other thinkers, right? To get into that kind of a zone where we perceive the world and how we make sense of it through techniques that are not so easily capturable through the formal approaches, which are incredibly useful and powerful, but not for certain fundamental political purposes.
So
Why? I don't know, but I think that's worth.
So I hear Werner Heisenberg in the chat from George, the indeterminacy principle.
Yeah,
And
or to have a
Phil,
hunch,
the
like Phil
return
said, to
to
have a
the
hunch,
pre-Socratics, the intuition,
or
right?
the creative, the
Sense, right?
intuition and the creative. And of
Yeah.
course, in mathematics, I don't know, I used to know this stuff when I was studying it a little bit, but there is the intuitionist school in mathematics, which was kind of a major critic of the dominant school of model theory, theory of models, which is related to set theory and etc. But so I'm sure in higher mathematics, this fight is also being waged, I'm sure. Just like in physics, or just like in any of the creative, philosophically inclined, non-formal, non-positive, not non-formal, but not positive, dogmatic positivist minds in science, they're also waging this battle, of kind of critiquing the total domination of positivist kind of narrow formal logic reasoning as the limit condition for what humans can do when trying to make sense of things, in life.
Yeah, just going back to contradictions, we speak about formal, of course, there are material contradictions. And, there's a school of philosophy called the Transcendental Pragmatic School, Carl Otto Appel being one of the leading people, who come up with three basic forms of contradictions, which are the formal, the rational, and then the pragmatic. So it seems like the left is always in the moment of the pragmatic contradiction. We can figure out the formal and the irrational usually pretty well. If I could for a minute, I did find in Heidegger where he did speak about cybernetics in the what is called thinking, where we did the end of philosophy and the task of thinking, the text. I'll just read you quickly because I think it's very much appropriate for this reading we're doing. No prophecy is necessary to recognize that the sciences now establishing themselves will soon be determined and piloted by the new fundamental science. I emphasize fundamental science, which is called cybernetics. This science corresponds to the determination of man as an acting social being, for it is the possible planning and the arrangement of labor. Yeah. So this is Heidegger in the end of philosophy and the task of thinking, that the new science is yeah.
And of course, I mean, as we know from these thinkers that we read, there are political structures or temporal structures, right? I mean, being is time and etc. Political structures are temporal structures, and temporal structures as perceived by people are immediately and above all political structures because they structure life in these collectivities that human life has evolved around, which cannot evolve outside of, even in the, despite the persistence of the suicidal persistence of the liberal models. But so then what are the emerging temporal structures of societies where which are organized ever more strictly over or through formal mathematical reasoning, excluding, non-determined existence, as George said, or excluding stochastic approaches to elections or making sense of scientific results only, or excluding relying on a hunch because that's not a formalized result, right? What are the temporal structures that exist in people or in social relations that are open to hunches and uncertainty and etc.? Versus we know what the temporal structures of socialized cybernetics is because we're living through it every day. Apps that track your time, kind of linear time, almost the complete avoidance of any kind of non-linear time. I mean, it seems to me that's one of the defining features of the way cybernetics is shaping life, biopolitics today, right? The cybernetic phase of biopolitics is about extremely linear time.
Well,
right?
Heidegger doesn't mince his words. That's why he says planning. He
Right.
uses this very carefully, in his way. Again, yeah.
Like you're gonna have to wait 33 minutes and 25 seconds before the subway comes. Okay, I mean that's a trivial example, but
that's usually
perhaps that's
inaccurate
useful,
in New York City. It may work in other cities,
which
but
is
New
wonderful,
York City, forget
but
it.
which is wonderful, but
Right,
like,
right. It's got to
you know,
that's the nice thing about in New York still, the anarchy of everyday life.
or if you fly,
Never
but
know.
the problem is they wanted to formalize it, but they couldn't because they were incompetent to even formalize it, But like you're flying in an airplane and you look at the map and it's like you have 2 minutes and 25 seconds before landing, or 5 hours and 35 minutes. And this kind of, instead of suspending that and just looking out the window and, in the clouds or just, whatever, but what are the temporal structures that we need to be imagining and counterpoising to I'm not even sure linear time is the
No,
correct word,
it's the
but
time of both
or
political.
simplified time or one-dimensional time,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, it's one dimensional. It's
Yeah.
political economy and political technology of the body. It's supposed to keep the body in rhythm, in step with the daily routine of these planned economies. I mean, a lot of people say planned economies was NEP, the new economic policies and socialist planning. I mean, this thing we have in the United States and globalization is completely planned. Now, it has its bumps in the roads. You have to adjust, get the toolkit out for the Federal Reserve, up money at a certain time. You have the tightening or the loosening of the interest rates. But in general, it's very much planned out, in a sense. I mean, think about how Wall Street works. You have analysts that cover companies. They make, estimates about what the bottom line will be, et cetera, right? If the price of the stock is valued according to that and it doesn't meet the expectations, it gets slaughtered. If it meets the expectations, it usually holds steady. If it exceeds it, it goes up. So these are the elements, but again, it's really a planned, liberal economy, or a planned, neoliberal economy, if you will, or a hyper-industrial economy. And in a sense, all this stuff about the national proper too. I mean, Japan's about ready to buy U.S. Steel. In a sense, I mean, you have to think of this always on the global level, in a sense. Yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you, I mean, this is an ugly story, but what's going on in the Middle East right now, the biggest beneficiary are the Greek ship owners and the ship owners of the world, of which the Greeks are the biggest Argonauts of all. Speaking of cybernetics, and who's handling the helmsman of the ship. In a way, they're closing off the Suez Canal. You know how much money they can charge to go around South Africa to deliver oil and other things at this point? I was in an office I think I told you this story, Upper West Side. I was trying to impress my girlfriend to go see, someone who knew part of my family, in his office on the West Side, and he has maps of the world and all the ships positioned there. And it was during the 1967 war. Very profitable, he says. Very profitable to us. We charge 5 times the amount because we have to do extra thing. We make 3 to 4 times our normal profits every time. So of course you put 2 and 2 together. Well, who continues these wars in some senses? It's not only Mr. Biden, it's not only Mr. Austin, Mr. Blinken, and Mr. Generational talent of Mr. Sullivan, as Hillary Clinton called him. I would be appalled if Hillary Clinton called me a generational talent. But anyway, it's not these people that are doing this, and unless you read it that way, you're missing so much of the the global political economy that's working, right? And
the Chinese have told the Nasrallah that they promised not to deliver anything to Israel, so the Nasrallah are going to let them through.
There you go. That's the case. He who studies the seas will be, aware.
Well, that's an interesting. I mean, that's an interesting situation in the sense that the prime military power of the Anglo-Saxon imperial forces is control of the oceans, because Kursov made this point, the Russian historian that I mentioned in the first meeting. He said that in his genealogy of kind of like longue durée, like imperial politics or politics, he said that the British would, the English, which was a very primitive kind of marginal, politically speaking, marginal place at the beginning of the European Renaissance, Western European Renaissance, when the Ottomans took over Constantinople and thus they asserted control over the Mediterranean, Venetian banking houses primarily lost hegemony in the Mediterranean, because now other financial forces and military forces and economic forces were the powerful players in the Mediterranean. So what did they do? They moved to England. I mentioned this before, Fursov says. So the English elites, which were now received a massive infusion of Venetian know-how and, most importantly, capital, and also systems of knowledge, because the Venetians established the British university, the elite British university systems, Cambridge and Oxford, and et cetera, and the City of London. They established the City of London as a financial banking center. But then the question was a very practical question. Where are we going to build our power, financial power, and thus military power? Which way? We can't do it eastwards towards the European continental landmass, because if we go east enough, a little bit, we're going to hit the Ottoman Empire and the Mediterranean Sea and the Balkans. And if we go a little bit north, we're going to hit the Russians. So there's no play. And of course, there are intermediary states that are land as well. So where are we going to do? So Fursov says, in an example of creative political ingenuity, they went westward into the ocean, because the ocean was, from their point of view, a place in the world which had no rules. There was no hegemon there, so they could make their own rules. and they could potentially carve out their own imperial space with which to increase their personal wealth and their et cetera, et cetera. So the British decided to become a seafaring civilization as their primary location of politics and economics, and everything proceeded from that decision because they couldn't move, they were a tiny power. They didn't have what it takes to confront the hegemons on the land, so they moved into the oceans, right? And so now that in a part of the ocean, that hegemony is being directly challenged. Who knows what's going to happen? But in one of the major sea routes, Anglo-Saxon imperial naval power is being challenged. And Saddam Hussein did that, right? In a sense, in 1991, when he said, I'm gonna, sell oil now in euros. Euros were nominally speaking, the land grounded civilizations, capitalist kind of class that was making its wealth through the control of the European subcontinent or European continent. But now in the Gulf of Aden, you have direct challenge to sea power. That's America's power. America's power is not in land-based warfare, as we saw, unfortunately, from the Ukrainian point of view. They got advised on how to plan military operations on land, and they were completely incompetent. Completely incompetent. The Russians are still kind of holding their hands up, like, what are these people doing? Are they for real? They don't know how to fight. They don't know how to fight ground warfare. They're talking about the British and the Americans. And the losses were catastrophic in Ukraine, of course. But now, for the first time, I think in a while, sea power, is being challenged. I mean, not globally, of course, but in that strategic area that affects global trade in a very significant way. So, of course, the Americans are going to attack. So, of course, unfortunately, we're going to see military, probably, we're going to see war in Yemen again. The previous war barely ended, and now again,
Right. I think you bring up a good point too, to just work parallel with, again, this economy and biology, et cetera, too. When you speak of the Saddam Hussein wanting to go, to trade in euros, oil, et cetera, simultaneously you have the election of Bill Clinton after George, Senior, George Herbert Bush. This was the beginning of the real leap forward of the technology. This was the beginning of the Silicon Valley, derivative moment, right? In a sense. So the economy is retooling at the same time this is happening, and ultimately the euro, as you well know, is now, 30 to 35% off its high, in relation to the American dollar. So it's always good to, I think, read these things in a parallel fashion. What's actually going on in this, as Firsthoff said, in this elite, right? This, what you don't see on stage,
the crypto elites. Yeah.
The crypto elites, yes, exactly. And what's happening during that period. Yeah, so very, very important to remember that. Robert Rubin from Citibank, et cetera. The taking of risks, risk management becomes part of the new code word in the 90s, up until the dot-com bubble of 2001. That's reconstituted by the time of, the second attack on Saddam Hussein. That's when you begin to see a reevaluation of Silicon Valley upward. And then, of course, the crash of 2008, 2009, that financial bubble, which, again, just put a dent in this machine because they restructure all the time. This is something that, has to be taken into account. How is it restructured, right? In many ways.
I mean, another interesting, just to combine what you just said with our previous conversation of sort of this uncertainty, certainty, and hunch and substitute. And again, unfortunately, through the example of war, because we're living in a period of increased kind of large scale wars, unfortunately, but like the NATO-Russia war, right? I mean, NATO is fighting the war through, as it always does in the American way and the Western way, through the constant belief in technological fixes to your problems. So like if we come up with a technologically sophisticated way of fighting war, if we have artificial intelligence systems and supercomputers that can run war games and military planning, we'll gain the edge because the computer, artificial intelligence supercomputing systems are superior to the flawed, biased human mind that doesn't see the full picture and whatever. They used supercomputers to plan the Ukrainian so-called counteroffensive. This is the New York Times, the New York Post wrote about this. The Pentagon uses supercomputers to input probably hundreds of thousands of variables and information about troops and the weather and, it's psychological profiles of the enemy and whatever. It's bullshit. It's inadequate. Why? Because they were fighting against the Soviet approach, which is Hegelian. Their military science was, I mentioned, invented by a group of military theorists who were basically using Hegelian logic and interpreting industrial war, versus the Soviet approach, which is about appropriate dispositions before the battle and during the battle. What are the appropriate dispositions given, what you're trying to do what you're facing, leaving enormous amounts of time and space for human creativity. And that's the big joke here, because all standard approaches to analyzing the Soviet way of war since the Nazis through the Cold War, the Soviet way of fighting war was mechanical. They had no initiative. They waited for superior officers. Exactly the opposite is true. People have written about it. The opposite is true. The Soviet way of war is actually places a premium on the uncertainty, where human creativity and try to overcome contradiction is most active. And in the American way of war and the Israeli way of war, because they're even more radical with their artificial intelligence, usage, the opposite is true. The absolute omission and removal of human thinking at all, as much as possible, and let the simulated human intelligence do the work in order to overcome the limitations that they perceive of the humans. The results are disastrous for them, of course, at a cost of great loss of life, which they, of course, don't suffer, because that's how they fight wars, through intermediaries. But at some points, they can't avoid fighting themselves. And I think this Yemen situation might be one of them, because now the US Navy is on the coast of Yemen, where they may actually end up having to fight instead of their proxies, like the Saudis or something, or the Israelis. Once you destroy a town by bombing all the civilian buildings and the other side doesn't go away, what do? Then you have to go inside the ruins and fight. And at that point, artificial intelligence will not help you at all. Because how would it know what to do? It's like, if you've never been in that situation before in exactly the same way, how is artificial intelligence going to help you? And they can't do it. They're just not good at it. So these are interesting questions that expose how the organon that you use, the logic, the system of logic that you use to structure your thinking about something, directly affects how you do something. And I think maybe this is why we need to study these questions of what is our framework, like what is the logic through, or the logics through which we make sense of the world in a systematic way that has its place.
Right. If I could just mention something, going back to Agamben, just for a second, this whole notion of how he's taking on biology and this separation between the bios and bios life, where he begins this book, this distinction between animal life and life itself, the zoe and the bios in the beginning, and then how he comes down to what is spoken of in our time. And remember, this book's dated a little bit, but I'm sure it's still relevant in conversations. So this is on page 164, after he's talked about Karen Quinlan and euthanasia, if you remember that case. So some of us are old enough to remember the Karen Quinlan case, or we blow the plug or not. Anyway, this means that today, this is proposition 6.14 on politicizing death. This means that today is an implicit in Peter Medivar's observation that in biology, discussions on the meaning of the words life and death are signs of a low-level conversation. Life and death are no longer properly scientific concepts, but rather political concepts. Very interesting here, too, another separation that he does, which as such acquire a political meaning precisely only through a decision. This is very interesting. Only the political comes into science through a decision. The frightful and incessantly deferred borders, of which Molleret and Goulon spoke, are moving borders because they are biopolitical borders, and the fact that today a vast process is underway in which what is at stake is precisely the redefinition of these borders indicates that the exercise of sovereign power now passes through them more than ever and once again cuts across the medical and the biological sciences. In a brilliant article, Galen evokes the specter of bodies, which he calls neo-morts, I guess new deaths, playing on the French, neo-morts, which would have the legal status of corpses, but would maintain some of the characteristics of life for the sake of possible future transplants. They would be warm, pulsating, and urinating, harvesting, right here. In an opposite camp, the body kept alive by life support systems has been defined by a supporter of brain death as a false living on which it is permitted to intervene without any reservations. The hospital room in which the neomort, the overcomatose person, and the false living waver between life and death delimits a space of exception, no longer state of exception, but a space of exception, very interesting, at which a purely bare life, entirely controlled by man and his technology, appears for the first time. And since it is precisely a question, not of a natural life, but of an extremely embodiment of Homo Sacer, the comatose person has been defined as an intermediary being between man and an animal. What is at stake is once again the definition of a life that may be killed without the commission of homicide, that is, like Homo Sacer, unsacrificable, in the sense that it obviously could not be put to death following a death sentence. This is why it's not surprising that some of the most ardent partisans of brain death and modern biopolitics propose that the state should decide on this moment of death, removing all obstacles to intervention of the false livings. So he's really playing on Reiter, state and health to the extreme this has been taken, by in particular the American medical industrial complex, where we really are here, that, and it's no accident that he's putting out human guinea pigs in the preceding chapter to then talk about politicizing death, how this works until he goes into the camp as nomos. So they never went this far down the path. But, and this is a clear sign that biopolitics has passed beyond a new threshold, much worse, in some sense, in a modern democracies, right? Modern democracies, crucial. It is possible to state in public what the Nazi politicians not dare to say. He's good. Yeah, I mean, he's really interesting here in the sense, and then he sets up this state space of exception, the camp. Right? It's kind of interesting how he goes, the hospital room in our time is a space of exception, going back in time that the camp replaces the city, right, as the nomos of, as the new nomos, as the new convention, as the new law, etc. So very, very interesting of the modern and how the modern works.
There's a key, before you go on, Michael, I just wanted to, so there's speaking of what we were talking about before, but also now on page 153, where he talks about Heidegger and Heidegger's dissatisfaction with the Nazi political turn. And so I don't know if, Michael, you're going to agree with this, what he says here, but on the top of page 153, he says, for both Heidegger and National Socialism, life has no need to assume values external to it in order to become politics.
Right.
Life is immediately political in its very facticity.
Right.
I always thought that Heidegger was criticizing this, right? That was the problem, that life was immediately facticity. But anyways, man is not a living being for the Nazis who must abolish or transcend himself in order to become human. Man is not a duality of spirit and body, nature and politics, life and logos, but is instead resolutely situated at the point of their indistinction. I think that's really the key point of Agamben's. It's really great point to make us think about this. What happens when these fundamental dualities that are active in any human civilization, in any period of history, once they become declared to be indistinguishable, right? Flattened, man is no longer the anthropomorphous animal who must transcend himself to give way to the human being. Man's factical existence already contains the movement that is, if grasped, constitutes him as design and therefore is a political being. So that's really the essence of the Nazis, and also the liberals. Even the liberals proclaim, you know, civil society, private, public, but civil society, of course, we already know from Foucault, it means not society or the political.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm glad you brought up this passage, because this is taken from Heidegger's rectoral address, you know, during the time when he was allegiance, you know, and, you know, saluting the party, so to speak, you know, in the introduction of the and the famous revealing words in his course in 35, the works that are now being peddled about nowadays. This is 152 of a preceding page from where you read, or as the philosophy of National Socialism, have nothing to do whatever with the inner truth and greatness of this movement, namely the encounter between global technology and modern man. You know, something that Homo datum in a certain way is continuing in terms of this crisis of planetary technology, and what does it mean to be human, right? In a way, these works have all been written by men falling in the troubled waters, and this is interesting, of values and totalities. Heidegger was not a value thinker. That's why I think Agamben goes into facticity on the next page. National Socialism's error and betrayal of its inner truth consists in its having transformed the experience of factical life into biological value. Yeah, so this is where, you know, our everyday fallenness is now constituted in a biological value for the Nazis. Hence the contempt with which Heidegger repeatedly refers to Rosenberg, Alfred Rosenberg, you know, the Nietzschean, you know, the very reductionistic, you know, the myth of, you know, you know, he wrote a book on National Socialism, as well as was a Nietzsche scholar, Alfred Rosenberg. While the greatest achievement of Heidegger's philosophical genius was to elaborate the conceptual categories that kept facticity from presenting itself as a fact. Right, and this is the attack upon positivism too, Arto, that's going on here. Nazism ended with the incarceration of factical life in an objective racial determinations, and therefore with the abandonment of its original interests, of its original inspiration. But what interests us, the perspective, is the political meaning of where you started here. Life has no need to assume values external to it. So this whole attempt here, you know, and how Dasein ultimately becomes historical, you know, and I think he's interesting here too. This sentence a little lower from where you read. It is as if, page 153, about 15 lines down. It is as if the bare life of Homo Sacer, whose exclusion founded sovereign power, now became, in assuming itself as a task, explicitly and immediately political. And yet this is precisely which characterizes the biopolitical turn of modernity, the condition in which we still find ourselves. And it's this point where Nazism and Heidegger's thought radically diverge. Nazism determines the bare life of Homo sacer in a biological and eugenic key, making it into a site of an incessant decision on value and non-value, in which biopolitics continually turns into thanatopolitics, in which the camp becomes the absolute political space, right? In Heidegger, on the other hand, Homo sacer, whose own very life is always at issue in every act, instead becomes a Dasein. This is interesting. The there beingness, the inseparable unity of being and the ways of being of subject and qualities, life and world, whose own being is at issue in its very being. If life in modern biopolitics is immediately politics, here this unity, which itself has the form of an irrevocable decision, withdraws from every external decision and appears as an indissoluble cohesion in which it is impossible to isolate something like a bare life. In the state of exception, become the rule, the life of Homo Sacer, which was the correlate of sovereign power, turns into existence over which power no longer seems to have a hold. So I think this is a very important passage to kind of, again, think Heidegger outside of quote unquote direct complicity with the thought and with the Nazi regime, because Heidegger really did not have this concept of biology. Biology for him was a regional science, right, in a sense. Very, very important to keep that in mind, and that ontology is really overcoming, biology here, in many ways. So yeah, anyway, I think this is a great passage here, which you brought up here too, about what ultimately is the political and its relationship, right, to facticity, right? Yeah. And how do we get out of this nostalgia for humanism, right? In a sense, because we never fulfilled, when I was writing and trying to think about cybernetics, I mean, I'm thinking that, the first Enlightenment never reached its fulfillment, the Kantian moment of the Aufklärung or the Lumière in the French sense, or even the Scottish Enlightenment in a certain way, never really reached its fruition. But we're living in a second period of quote Enlightenment, where the promise is there through AI, which you could call the republic, right, of cybernetics in a certain way, that is creating this new moment of enlightenment without having gone through the first. And this, to me, is why Lyotard, in some ways, writes the postmodern condition. He's trying to think this through in a sense that what has this age done to us, in a sense that the grand narrative of the Enlightenment, of which Marx is a child of the Enlightenment, he basically is a suspicious of it ultimately, and because it really turned into a discourse on rights and on human rights and nothing, more in a sense. And what was the result of the Enlightenment was that science became a kind of new godhead, became something, as Heidegger would say, does not think, it only does, right? In a way, out of the Galilean moment from Galileo all the way through, to modern science. And, and still within that system, if you will, we still have not really, come to know what it means to be human, vis-a-vis Enlightenment thinking and experiencing this. Hence, why we have so many guinea pigs, why we have such passivity. We have to ask, where does this come from? Because if you really take a look at what's going down, it is absolutely insane. I mean, really, this is an absolute insanity that's happened. Look, professors had a good go of it the last 30, 40 years in terms of building up, pensions, et cetera, retirement packages, et cetera, if you'd been in the field for a long time, et cetera. Those days are completely over for a new generation of professors. This is gone. It's gone. I mean, tenure is no longer a thing that's active in most universities. Maybe it's some of the elite institutions. You look at most of the fields in the creative arts, no longer there at all, in a way. Yeah. 60% of the kids that go to Princeton, they want to be investment bankers. Right? Yeah. There's no attempt at all to think through things or think, right? George Soros's son writes a dissertation on the Jewish Dionysius. I think I told you this, at Berkeley, loves philosophy and all of this. This is Soros's son. What does he do? He's chosen by his father to go run the quantum fund, the billions of dollars now. So he's going to get into that role. He supposedly has quote, liberal causes in mind, whatever that means, we'll save the planet, save the, save the wino is the best project, really. We used to laugh in the East Village, save the wino. There was a guy coming around asking for money, save the wino, right? You had to give him money. It was creative, at least. At least he was honest why he wanted to change. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I think this is, very, very important to see this in this light. And again, for me, it's look, I'm not trying to only justify my existence of doing philosophy instead of making money or whatever. But anyway, in a sense, these are very, very serious questions for our times. Where are we really going here? And how do we think this through? And in terms of its, and I always liked Heidegger's thing about historicality as sight, right? I like the materiality of Heidegger's language. It's like, building, dwelling, and thinking. It's always interrelated, this building, this dwelling, this thinking. You're always within some kind of structure. Heidegger's really a proto-structuralist in a way. Nobody really, yeah, it's very interesting to begin to see him this way, and, yeah. So I don't know, I'm going on and on here, but I think this is very important, this politicization, giving form to life, and then ultimately how life itself, in a sense, becomes politicizing death, right? Politicizing death, right? Etc. And then he moves on, and I was just wondering how people thought about this notion of the camp, no longer the city as our nomos. Do we think through the camp? And I reference Mike Davis's book Planet of Slums, which is very interesting. And of course what's going on in what's been called an open prison or whatever you want to call it today. I mean, Gaza, who knows? I don't know if we have a term yet. I mean, the death toll is over 20,000 in 74 days. You do the math on this, this is basically over 300 people indiscriminately killed. Hamas is basically minimal collateral damage. The intention of the thing. When you really begin to think this through, what's actually going on, I mean, yeah. And, what does this mean, the camp? And, can we think of this also in terms of so many other moments post-World War II, in a sense, this wonderful juxtaposition, if you will, in Battle of Algiers between the Kasbah and the European quarter. I don't know, most of you are probably seeing Pontecorvo's great film, but how he constantly, the camera position juxtaposes the Kasbah and the distance, and then the European quarter that's on the ground, right? This kind of movement, the ghettoized, narrow streets, right? In a sense, right? And, yeah, I mean, to me, this is very important. And what does it mean that you're basically politicizing death today in these wars that we're witnessing in contemporary terms? I mean, I think that a lot of this is very, if you will, appropriate to the times. I mean, it needs to be rethought, and I'm not gonna, just uncritically read Agamben, and I agree with Arto completely about the use of totalitarianism, how that can really throw us off in terms of thinking. But at the same time, yeah, it's very, very, very interesting, these thoughts he has at the end. For example, the camp is a hybrid of law and fact in which the two terms have become indistinguishable, right? He has this definition on page 170. The camp, is thus the structure of which the state of exception, the possibility to decide on which found sovereign power is realized normally, right? Very, very interesting, how he goes through the hybrid of law and fact, right, in some ways, and according to which everything is possible, right, in a sense, and the bare life in the camp's, inhabitants, etc. So today I'm watching Al Jazeera. This guy almost gets bombed out. And this is daily life for these people. I mean, they just walk around and all of a sudden, boom, hospitals, schools, mosques, etc. It's completely indiscriminate. And as Arto knows better than me, this is AI directing a lot of this too. This is the machine making decisions. This is where Hamas has a probability of existing. This is where, they once were in 1950 or something. I'm just, throwing out some things. But yeah, this kind of data generated, indiscriminate bombing and killing. So for me, this is very prescient. It's very, very, very interesting. And it's not only there, not only there. Yeah.
It's also
Yeah.
interesting that the founder of Hamas was actually a paraplegic, a
Yes.
man who was completely crippled, got
Yes.
around in a wheelchair,
Yes.
but was brilliant.
Yes. Yes. And it also was formed because the state, the Palestinian Authority, and the PLO could not provide social services for its people. It really started out as a social service organization, as an institution of care. I'm not praising them, but at least go through their background and see where they came from, out of this. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. And of course, nobody says anything that this could have been a counterattack. In a way. I mean, I just got off the phone. My sister, she works in a as a child psychologist in a Jewish-run school in Nashville, Tennessee. We're already in arguments all the time. But anyway, you can figure, the lines on this. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, Hamas has a very long history, and also democratically elected. 30 to 35%. Maybe they wouldn't get the same vote today, but who knows? Yeah. You may know better than me, Phil. I don't know.
They do much better today.
Yeah, they do better in the polls.
Oh yeah, the polls show them like up around 70%. I mean, if you can't do a poll in Gaza, but on the West
kind of
Bank,
hard to do in between the bombs and the
right.
yeah. How do you feel about Hamas? Wait till the next bomb falls. I'll tell you. Yeah. So yeah, strange. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, I find this it's even if Agamben can be off, or you feel, this is, somewhat too extreme at times, there are leaps, etc. It certainly is a provocation, right? In terms of what he's doing here, in terms of this biopolitics. And this is a continuation of Foucault, as you well know, the birth of biopolitics. And Foucault's, it's 44 years since these lectures in biopolitics. This is a very long, field. Yeah. But anyway, I'm wanted to hear from some other people. I mean, my thoughts about this. I wake up at 3:00 in the morning. Like James Brown in a cold sweat. But anyway, and I sleep on nails, so it's not no news to me. But anyway, if I go to sleep, sometimes, yeah. But yeah, I mean, any thoughts about this? Is this too extreme? I mean, I think we're really trying to push, as much as we can so that we can get back to a kind of, subjectivity, if you will, or just the notion of a subject for today's, yeah. And what does agency really mean now? Yeah, what does agency mean? Yeah.
Yeah, well, as Gramsci said, the old world is dying, and the new world has yet to be born.
Right.
So now is the time of monsters.
Right. Yes. Well, sometimes in French that can be a positive term, and in certain vernaculars it can be a positive term. The problem is these are very ugly monsters that have been created, and not so intelligent either. The way they speak. Yeah. I mean, you look at the Houthi spokespeople; they're more articulate than Jake Sullivan in English. Their second or third language, right? It's unbelievable. Yeah.
As far as the session goes, can we go back to what Arto read earlier?
Which was? Yeah.
I don't know, it was on page 151, I think.
Okay,
Something he led with.
Yeah, 150, 153, I think, right?
Oh, yeah, but the point you were making. And
Yeah. I just felt like it was he did the same thing with the discussion when he wrote about the Muslim, the Musulman that Michael quoted last class, where once you what it's this he used the same word, I believe, the indistinction or similar word. Like one that seems to be the exercise or the outcome of totalitarian politics, in the Nazi sense, or liberal politics, if we combine Foucault and Agamben's writings on this topic, is like once you collapse what does it mean to be human into this other category where all the fundamental things that historically have, through reflection, people have said are necessary for people to actualize themselves as human. Once you collapse those categories, once you eliminate them, once they become indistinguishable, then you are in this new terrain, which is the biopolitical. The biopolitical is the terrain that forms a new political subjectivity, and this new political subjectivity seems terrifying, precisely because it's a radical break with the way political subjectivity was imagined, before it, and it because also allows horrible things to be done with a ferocity and scale of killing that wasn't necessarily imaginable before. Not that it wasn't there, but it was just justifying it in different ways and unimaginable. So, I mean, yeah, man is not a living being who must abolish or transcend himself in order to become human. So, if you assume that what does it mean to be human is defined by your heredity and by your genetics, as measured by some scientific tests which discover the presence of a degenerative disease or some kind of an inherited medical condition or some kind of a physical disability that you were born with or you developed later in life. And since if those scientific tests can establish that you are suffering now from some kind of a disability, and thus we can connect that to your genetic makeup, which means if you have kids, you're going to potentially transfer that in the next generation, where then that's all we need to know in order to make a certain political decision about you, which is we're going to prevent you from procreating, or we're going to kill you, or we're going to lock you up for the benefit of the organism, itself. Once you reach that stage the only way you can reach that stage of politics is if you purposefully and willingly declare any other ways of thinking about what does it mean to be human to be wrong or invalid and thrown out, right? So if you abandon this fundamental old question of the duality of the human experience, right? Human beings are split between spirit and body, right? Body and soul, or a lot of people have reflected on this. Descartes, in the European tradition, right? Spinoza, Descartes had their arguments, and all the great jazz singers sing about it, or all the blues musicians, comment on it constantly, and right. So once you abandon the question of the duality of the spirit and the body, nature and politics, nature and nurture, right? Life and reason, the biological us versus the reasoning part of us, or the instinctive us versus the consciously kind of deliberate part of us. If you abandon any insight from Freud on the human psyche, for example, as bullshit, and you don't take that into consideration as you try to make sense of what is happening to you, but once you abandon all those things as unnecessary and wrong, which actually is exactly what cybernetics abandons, or at least the first generation of cybernetics, which is that's where all the main thinkers came thus far, right? So cyberneticists would say, like Bateson, he has no use for questions of the spirit. Like that's just nonsense. That's just a bunch of fiction, or that novelists wrote about, or we have no, because you can't mathematically capture the human spirit. You can't find it on a CAT scan, or even if you did, 100 years from now, I'm sure we're going to uncover a hidden variable, as David Bohm would say, that would still not answer the question definitively mathematically of what the spirit is. What is life and logos? Well, cybernetics believes that you can model human consciousness through mathematical models and posit it as a computing machine that's really powerful, but it has finite. Like, cyberneticists have calculated what is the computational speed of the human mind. Like, neurons moving at certain speeds, they can calculate a number that they think gets close to the actual, like, hardware limits of the human mind.
Mhm.
But then other scientists like Roger Penrose, the physicist, would say, well, actually, these are meaningless computations, because if you can't compute the human mind using the model of electronic circuitry that power current generation computers, he's like, you're going to get one answer. But if you assume that the human mind follows quantum mechanical principles of action, and there's, simultaneity, and there's complementarity and whatever, then the computational power of the mind is infinite. That's a very different answer. So like, why limit yourself when you don't have to, right? But once you do this reduction, which is the Nazi reduction, which is similar to the cybernetic reduction, but of course through different fundamental categories. The Nazi fundamental category was genetics, heredity. The cybernetics category is even on thinner ground. It's like the assumption that the human mind is a computer, can be most accurately represented or thought of as a computing machine, input, outputs, etc. Once you do that, you define what does it mean to be human in a very, very narrow way. And you leave out a whole bunch of stuff that you can't reasonably explain leaving out unless you don't want to talk about it or consider it, or you dismiss it outright, And once you do that, once you say human life is biology, and thus politics is biology, you can invent the category of what was that? The VP? What was the German word for the VP? Human is guinea pigs.
Yeah,
Then you can very easily invent a category where some human beings are guinea pigs, and thus they can be used. They're disposable. It doesn't matter if you're hurting them or if you're torturing them. They're crying, screaming in pain because they drank salted water, and in order to stop the agony, they're sucking on the fresh water that's present in rags on the floor. You can reason that to yourself and be like, it's okay that I did that, because these are just genetically flawed humans who don't experience pain the way we do. And then you can engage in genocide far more effectively.
Or subhuman. Subhuman would be where you do it with all your animals, cats and
Right.
dogs and,
Yeah, you can engage in mass animal torture. You can be okay with exactly some kind of animal testing that you can find other ways of doing without doing that to them, because they're after all, they're inferior biological beings. They're not part of these other calculations. So all kinds of horrible things related to political violence become industrial in scale, which is what the Nazis did exactly, which is what the British Empire did in industrial size killing, before the Nazis.
It's what the U.S. Empire does. I mean, I remember my incoming briefing in the Philippines in the U.S. Air Force at the base theater, and this big chief master sergeant got up there on the stage and said, "Downtown is a den of iniquity. Those people do not experience life the way we do. They do not value life the way we do." And it was a whole lecture on how they were subhuman. So that's the way the U.S. does it too.
Well, Phil, I mean, somebody posted on one of the listservs, maybe at school, that there's a book published by Monthly Review Press now, which attempts a tally of the body count of Anglo-American the imperial reign And the body count, according to the author of the book, is 300 million people in like 140 years.
Yeah,
I haven't
there was
read the book, so I don't know, but that's an unimaginable, that's the highest number yet.
there's a film done by Barbara Koppel that was, well, actually by Vietnam Veterans Against the War. It was done while I was just getting involved with them, and it's called Winter Soldier. I put it up online. I'll put the I'll drop the link in the chat. It goes over what what we did in Vietnam. I mean, it was horrible. It was brutal, incredibly brutal.
Yeah, and I think the greatness of Agamben's project is that it introduces these words, I think, into common usage and ways of thinking about unimaginably horrible things like deliberate, like genocides, like deliberate or industrial scale murder of people. I mean, the Nazi genocide was actually more than the 8 million people. The 8 million people were just the most defenseless people who were stored into the camps, the labor camps, which then had sections that were death camps, right, for those who couldn't work. But I mean, if we take the whole tally of the Nazis, it's basically the genocide was in the Soviet Union and Poland primarily, but primarily in the Soviet Union. That's 27 million people as of the last revised numbers. That's 27 million people in 4 years, of which about 8 million were military. 8 or 9, depending on who you count. The vast majority were civilians, direct killing, starvation, malnutrition, etc. Think about that number, 27 million people dead. We're not even counting the wounded, the psychological damage that's permanent and permanently affected people's lives. And 27 million people in 4 years. And then we understand what's happening, regardless of how we feel about the current Russian government, about the resuscitation of Nazi symbology in the place where 27 million people died. And I think the only comparable scale is probably the Korean War in terms of the maximum number of people killed in the minimum amount of time. I think the Koreans lost the most. I think they lost 35% of their population or 40% of their population in 3 years of war. I think that's the record.
Yeah, 20%, I think.
20% of the population in 3 years.
Right.
Which should definitely, if people who wonder about the nature of the North Korean political system or whatever, their political choices, if they knew those numbers and if they thought about them a little bit, 20% of the population. So let's just extrapolate to the United States, 330 million people in the United States, last census, thereabouts. What's 20%? That's what, 60 million? 60, imagine, if we ask the average American person, right? Can you imagine a catastrophic war that the US was involved in, where over 3 years of war, 60 million Americans died?
Yeah, you can also use
it's uncomputable.
You can also use the Euclidean frameworks too to look at what's going on in Gaza and just compare it to minor cities right now in terms of how many deaths are there in a given space, right? Which is astronomical too. When you really think about it, Gaza is a small place, right?
Yeah.
South.
And the question becomes,
country in a sense. And you're into the 77th, 78th day, I forgot. But anyway, with over 20,000 deaths that we know of, not including what's going to be uncovered in the rubble, another 50 to 60,000 injured, we don't know to what degrees yet, etc., in this very concentrated small space, in a sense, maybe the size of Brooklyn, New York. You go to someone, 20,000 people died in the last 2 months, because of bombing in Brooklyn. People are, would go nuts, right? In a sense, right? To put it into a perspective. But nobody has these kind of perspectives because we're not thinking politics as space. We're not thinking politics as time. We always think about politics, as you know, Arto, as election, as who's in this department, whatever, representatives, et cetera. So I think the interesting part of Agamben, to go back to him, in a sense, the provocation is to think the political completely different, that Aristotle in some ways is no longer relevant. Clausewitz is no longer relevant for our purposes. And I mean, with all due respect, I love Aristotle. I love, I can read Clausewitz and learn a lot, but I mean, this is very different. And as Phil mentioned about Vietnam changed modern warfare radically, and what was done there changed sensibility about war completely. And, in a sense, I mean, and it's no accident that Deleuze and Guattari said, the generals say, we won't get fooled again. They use the who, for, we won't get fooled again. Well, they're getting fooled everywhere, but at the same time, it's the same kind of brutality of the war machine refined. McNamara is like the kid in the class right now, compared to some of these people, these warmongers. Yeah, in a sense. And the amazing thing to me too is there's a generation in control of some of the media, the alternative media, but nobody plays Bob Dylan's Masters of War, when they present stuff, which is a stroke of genius. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable how political it is. You realize what Malcolm X told Sam Cooke, that brother's doing something. Why aren't you singing protest songs, in a sense? So, all the material is there. That's part of the problem too. There is this lack of thinking, that's gone on since this, internet highway 92. I think this stuff makes us stupid in some ways. I think Stiegler is right in a certain way. The more we rely on the machine, the more for digital communication, the whole thing of the networking, all of these things really need to be examined and what they do to attention economy and the ability to think experientially in terms of memory and historical memory, and to bring these things to the foreground to be able to use them in a very powerful way. So that's I think very important. And with Heidegger, we have forgotten the question of memory. we have forgotten the question of what it means to retain. Yeah. And the machine does it for us. This battle between anonymita and hyponymita, we cannot recollect. We don't have that subjectivity. This is exactly what Wiener and and Bateson and others do. They're really playing on the hyponymita, the externalization of memory and the machine as memory, right? In a sense, right? And you well know that the secondary, especially to I guess Wiener, is the human being. It's the machine that counts, right? In many ways, yeah. Even though he'll use the human use, right? Yeah. So again, I think we always run the risk of falling back into the traps of earlier humanism without the power of, quote unquote, metaphors of the past that really bring it to the foreground. What's in charge here? What sending is in charge if you're Heideggerian? What class struggles in charge if you're Marxist? I think this is very, very important questions. And then again, an essential question that we're always trying to address, but we don't know where the F is the agency. Right, in a sense, I mean, you don't think they sit back there and look and say, oh, they're protesting on the Brooklyn Bridge again today. Let them do it. The kids are acting up, right? In a sense. Yeah. Phil, you want to say something? I know you
No, not really.
go out to some of these things. I participate too at times, but again, I'm thinking, how are they thinking when they watch this? They meaning, masters of war, right? Etc. Right? Yeah. And very well, Phil, that Vietnam wouldn't have ended if it wasn't for people internally going after their superiors in the army in Vietnam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, even outside of Vietnam, there were close to 1,000 cases of people killing their commanding officers.
What do they call that? Fragging?
Fragging. It's you throw you take a fragmentation grenade, you pull the pin and throw it into a hooch that your commanding officer is in, it blows up and kills him.
Right.
He's fried.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, today it's all sir. Everything is militarized to the point of where it's sir. The professor is sir or ma'am, in a way. This kind of return of the authoritarian command system, very much so. So these are all, to me, very, very problematic in a way. And I find the language, too, of cybernetics, I mean, maybe I'm just such a novice at it, but I find it very infantile. There's no real thought going on here. It's like playing Pac-Man, step one, step two, etc. You begin to see how the video games condition people to be able to do this stuff and that's a huge industry that we're not even scratching the surface here on, the whole video game and the training for the war machine that's happening in terms of hand-eye coordination. I mean, you go to any of the young people's, you go to family dinners and you see with the 9 and 10-year-olds, they're on video games and they're all war games. That's what they do, I mean, in a sense. And I know Beryl and I, we've talked a little bit about this. Benjamin, study the toys of the kids coming up. You're going to find out what the consciousness is very soon. Yeah. I always like the Lone Ranger, So anyway, I kind of got into that one. Yeah, I mean, really, Kimosabe. I like Tonto. Tonto goes to the movies, right? Anyway, that was my thing. I figured that one out pretty quickly when they gave us that stupid story, and yeah. Anyway, yeah. I got in trouble in a high school literature class. In high school, I think 8th grade, we read parts of Robinson Crusoe. And I said, it seems to me that Friday's really the hero of this novel. The teacher got very upset. Can you imagine? I mean, this is education down south. Oh, he was an individual Robinson Crusoe. That was just his helper. Yeah. Yeah. The movies of My Girl Friday, huh? Remember the My Girl Friday, right? How that worked, that used to work in the old movies. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Yeah. Arto, I'm sorry to, you go ahead. I'm just
No, I didn't have, I mean,
yeah.
I feel like in terms of you said how there's this technology is making it stupid the way it's being used. And it's true. I mean, what's proliferating is pictograms. It's like we're devolving back to hieroglyphics. Like you use these computers, like Microsoft Windows. I just noticed you right click to delete a file, and a little window pops up, and there's no delete option in written out letters anymore. There's just a trash can icon. So it's almost like they're training you to use the icons because it's faster, it's more efficient, or whatever. You don't need to read. I mean, so there's a certain devolution in a way towards hieroglyphics. Like we're almost going, you can almost imagine like 300 years with this trajectory. Reading and writing would be so obsolete because it's so slow to type stuff in a chat box, You just have an infinite number of pictures to choose from, kind of like the ancient Egyptians.
Right.
Before the invention of the written word,
Right.
Yeah, just a note. The link that Matt put in the chat about PFLP's strategy. Sadly, I think it may have been removed because it doesn't work. So could you send it out with the
Sure. With the next class
email?
or in the next mass email, of course. Yeah. I think I downloaded it. I'm quick. At least I learned that from Arto, how to download quickly. So I may have it on file already. So I'll check and then I'll send it out to the group in downloaded form. Yeah. Beth's able to open it. So yeah.
Okay, I'll try something else.
Include me in the group because I haven't got
The original PLO back in the day was armed, where they were helped as a fighting machine by the Japanese Communist Party. This is a kind of George Hadash's lover was the Red Queen, responsible for one of the train blow-ups in Tokyo back in the day. You know, she's out of jail now, but yeah, because of her very good lawyer daughter. Right. So anyway, yeah. But she was the lover of George Hagash, in the early days of the PLO formation. So it's kind of interesting that the Japanese Red Army, faction is training the PLO in the early days. Yeah.
Yeah, when I went to Palestine in 2002, there were a number. There was a whole Japanese delegation there of Japanese radicals, that
Right.
were there to witness the well, it was the second Intifada, that was going on at that time.
You mean the genocide they want? Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, the second
Congresswoman, that
Intifada
idiot,
was the second
yeah.
uprising.
No,
The
of
first,
course. But did you hear that congressional thing? They think that Intifada means genocide of the Jewish people.
no, I know.
I mean, it's unbelievable with this going on with university presidents and U.S. House of Representative people. This back and forth. And the
Well,
university
that was the
presidents
way,
were
that was
unable,
the
who
way
are
it went
making on average $3 million a year, not including the deferred compensation, to come back and say that's not what the word means, dear Congresswoman. They nothing but you see the subservience at every level. This is the most frightening thing. This thing. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was I mean, you look back at the Joseph McCarthy hearings, and you see the same kind of dynamic.
Of course, the dynamic's similar, yeah. But again, you would think you would learn from history a little bit, but they don't. Paul Robeson didn't fall into that trap. Bertolt Brecht didn't fall into that trap. Yeah. Yeah. I like the old thing. You're getting fired. We hear you're a communist. We don't want radicals. Oh, the communists are much too conservative for me. Used to be the workers' response. They're too conservative. Right. I'm not a communist. I deny it. They're too conservative. Right. Yeah. Anyway, but it's strange, and this goes to show you again the degeneration of education, in a way. Yeah. In a sense.
Well, that's where I come in, Michael. We have the power right now. We've got Zoom. It's so easy to lock in, and I'll be punching in tomorrow morning at 8:00. But we can educate, through Zoom. This is wonderful what we're doing. And I'm sorry to stay so upbeat.
Yeah, okay. No, it's okay. No need to be sorry for being upbeat. You always need that. Arto knows this better than me too. You need that drum roll, man, at certain times to go.
Arto, you're wonderful.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is
there's also a great movie about it's on I think you can find it on YouTube about the last of the HUAC hearings, called it was made as a right-wing movie, but it's called Operation Overthrow.
Right.
And it's how I think it was probably the CP organized the students from UC Berkeley to come over to because they were having the HUAC hearings at San Francisco City Hall, and they they organized to just break them up, to go in and really give the questioners a hard time. I remember Mandel getting up there in front of the hearing and saying, if you think I'm going to answer your questions, you must think I'm insane,
This is Ernst Mandel?
Huh?
Ernst Mandel you're talking about?
Yeah.
The Trotskyist political economist? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
The only person I know where they went to his house to do his dissertation of defense. They all showed up the committee to his house. He was so good in terms of political economy. They went to his house. We'll go to Ernst's house to do the ceremony. Right. Yeah. 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 And interesting. Yeah. No, well, I mean, Brecht's testimony is a amazing artful dodger. He's like a, out of a Dickens character, the artful dodger. Everything he answered was so clever and so smart. And Robeson just let him have it. I don't know if you saw that. It's 12 minutes. It's one of the greatest thing, Yeah, yeah. I remember when you were a football player. What happened to you? I used to watch you play for Rutgers. America was good to you. Senator, I am now a lawyer, an actor, and a singer, and an activist. Right? If it's so good in Russia and China, why don't you go there?
Right.
Senator, my family were sharecroppers. I belong here. We deserve something here. I'm here to stay, et cetera, right? He was great. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, yeah, well, good. All right, well, we got a lot going on as usual, much to think about. I don't know, does anyone see anything in the, I mean, I was the one who chose the Agamben. I thought it would, be a nice provocation, something different here, for us. I just, wondering if anything really struck us. I think there are many very, striking passages throughout this book, and we only looked at part 3. Part 1 introduces the question of Homo sacer. What does it mean to be a biological versus an animal, and the difference between the biosphere and the animal sphere, in a way. He starts there, and then he has the whole thing of how sacred life was constituted, and his notion of the band. And he uses band in terms of the political boundary in some ways, but also abandonment, the moving away from the boundary. It's very interesting the way he plays on etymology, like in his Heideggerian background. And, he's strange, he's a strange, as I said, amalgamation, if you will, in terms of influences, but he also has a legal degree. He also has studied law, and jurisprudence very actively. And yeah. As well as, obviously very careful reading of Heidegger, Foucault. Walter Benjamin is very present in his work throughout, yeah. And this is the beginning volume of a 9-volume series. So it's not, we're just getting a, kind of introduction, et cetera. But I'll see if I can find the Negri eulogy. I mean, I like stories like this. These guys didn't speak to each other for years, but we're like this, and it comes back, and in a very beautiful way. It's like Sartre with Camus. They didn't speak, but he wrote a very beautiful eulogy when Camus died in the automobile crash. And yeah, Sartre was a great eulogist. Yeah. His eulogy on Merleau-Ponty is the greatest introduction to Merleau-Ponty I've ever read, and I've read a lot of good introductions. Yeah. And his friend Paul Nizan, of course, who understood philosophy as being a control mechanism in most academic departments. Yeah, the watchdogs, philosophers in the established order. Great book. Yeah.
Another story, but the good news is they're reading The Stranger at Bryan High School tomorrow.
Oh, that's good. Are they reading the Mersal investigation as well?
No.
That's a rewriting of The Stranger from
We
the
have Fahrenheit. There are some conservative old places alive. So.
I got you. Well, it's worth reading. It's beautifully written in French, Anyway, went through a lot of critical, hammering, if you will.
Camus, my man.
Okay. Well, the plague was certainly operative during COVID. Very interesting, to reread that during the COVID period, which we're probably still in to a degree. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah. Arto, anything else? I mean, you want to kind of set a frame for next time? I mean, we can certainly go back over a lot of the stuff, and any questions or anything anybody wants to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think next time we could just maybe go through some of the propositions and kind of leave the door open, and when we come back for a summary meeting, then we can maybe leave the seminar with some questions and some initial conceptual like frameworks on maybe some of the ideas that seem revealing or useful in trying to make sense of the changing subjectivity that regime that we're living through.
I'd like to look at genetics and actually where it changed between Soviet science and Lysenkoism, and in terms of the focus of what it meant to be human.
Well, I think
Before
this
patient theory, and you bring up all these guys looking at flies and whatever else, looking at it there.
Yeah, I think the work studying sort of the Soviet approach to cybernetics and their approach to internet, which of course suffered from positivism as well, but it was different. And I think the question of what does it mean to be human in some of those, I mean, for example, the Zagoric's experiment that I mentioned before definitively throws all the stuff that the Nazis argued in their face, that genetically quote unquote flawed, from the Nazi point of view, people who were born with all these severe disabilities, they couldn't really interact with the world because the only thing they could feel was vibrations from the outside world. Those people would have been slated for immediate execution by the Nazis, or at least, but the Zagoric's experiment, showed that as long as a human being has a mind that's functioning the way, the average human mind functions, it has all the parts and everything in the biological apparatus, the biology is not important at all on the question of what does it mean to be human. As long as you have the biological apparatus, even if you are born with other disabilities, lack of sight, hearing, you can't hear your voice, so then you can't develop speaking, right? Well, if somebody in your society invents a language or a means of communication that can transmit the fine details of human knowledge and human collective memory and history, then all of those people can be socialized. People with any kind of disability can be socialized, assuming they have, assuming they don't have some kind of a severe disability of the brain apparatus or whatever from an accident or from birth. All of those people in that school were socialized just like any other 5-year-old or 10-year-old or whatever, and they all became human beings in the sense that they were socialized as human beings. They learned about all the things that we learn as we grow up and socialized, with very small exceptions. What is the meaning of that? Well, that definitively answers the question that what does it mean to be human has very, very little to do with, or nothing to do with heredity.
Okay, but you're jumping the gun, Arto, because first of all, you're throwing out the Cold Spring Harbor and all the work that was done in the United States in terms of eugenicism. But more importantly, we're not looking at Soviet science before in terms of just a different approach. Men looking, okay, good.
Here's one example of Soviet science that connected to non-capitalist forms of development. Of course, they had their dominant school of cybernetics was just like the Western school. They replicated the same approaches, the same idea that the human mind is limited. Very quickly it'll be overcome. Those were the dominant. There were dominant players in Soviet cybernetics who thought that way as well. But the cyberneticists who worked with the philosophers who were socialists in their political orientation arrived at very different results. That's the interesting part. And for example, Monthly Review published a series of articles 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I forget now, about global warming and the relationship with industrial production and et cetera, and questions of environmental policies. And well, actually under Joseph Stalin, that was the first time in the 20th century that massive reforestation took place, in huge parts of Western Soviet Union, which has basically transformed the landscape in ways that they're still reaping the benefits from it, right? Or early climate science was actually a Soviet invention, in the sense of studying the potential for changing planetary kind of cycles because of particular choices made by humans, and these were the early pioneering works, and the early models came out of there. I mean, we have to read the monthly review article where this is spelled out in detail with the names and the citations and everything. But that kind of thinking about the planetary effects of industrial production anticipated liberal concerns by about 20 years or more, So I think that history of, or I don't know what's happening in China today or Cuba, like, what are the major figures in Cuban philosophy or Cuban scientists who are engaged with questions of industrial pollution, or, whatever the case might be, or healthcare? Those narratives get lost because of imperial politics, make those voices invisible. So I think part of the interesting work is to form connections and do translation and et cetera, to bring works that need to be read by everyone in all the languages, so we know what's going on. See, I'm saying this because the more I study the history of like Soviet philosophy or Soviet history in general, or World War II, from the point of view of like the West, the more I realize that there's a lot of things that are lost in translation, or simply because of Cold War politics or anti-communism or whatever. Like in the United States, we know nothing about something that should be as well studied as World War II on the Eastern Front. We know almost nothing unless you read the specialized literature, but even there, you read like Niall Ferguson's incredibly mediocre babble about the Soviet Union in World War II and its relationship to Nazism, and they're like two sides of the same coin. And his musings with, was that Canadian guy Peterson?
Jordan Peterson, yeah,
Jordan Peterson, 500,000 viewers on complete fiction on World War II and the Soviet
That's what
Union.
I tell Rick Wolf when he tells me he has 300,000 subscribers. You got 200,000 more to get to mediocrity, Jordan Peterson.
Okay, but the point, I'm sorry.
At least he laughs, Yeah.
You're missing my point. I'll try to be brief. It's the capitulation. It's the capitulation to Mendelian science. I'm speaking from, I would speak as a Lysenkoist, okay? And in terms of genetic theory, I said I'd be brief. Explain to me this. How do I have handsome Johnny, a purebred black Siamese cat who came out of the body of a, what do they call them? A ragdoll, long-haired white mother and a tabby father, which was my last contribution to Soviet science, I would say, just letting it go, and not look at things on the micro level. But explain to me, handsome Johnny, and then we'll go on in terms of capitulating to mutation theory. That's what I was trying to say before. The mutation theory of evolution is just bullshit. Excuse my language. And I'll shut up for tonight, and we'll go on. And I hope you read my dissertation, that was approved by Stanley Aronowitz, theoretical, and my practical application is behind us. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
It's great to see you.
Very good, George. Yeah, you're very good. I don't know if you ever read Dominique Lecour's great book on the Lysenko affair, but it's a magnificent treatment of some of the issues you brought.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yes, if you're interested in that. I mean, I have the working bibliography on the Lysenko.
I'm interested in vernal wheat and getting rid of.
And Richard Levotin's great work, Biology is Ideology.
course.
A wonderful, wonderful text on all this stuff. And I just want to reply, Arto, in some ways, yes, the experiments are great in the Soviet Union, but you have to remember in the United States, there were some very good advances in the psychiatric institutions in dealing with quote unquote mental illness. Many kind of examples, pedagogically, the radical pedagogy that went on, a lot of these moments. The problem is, again, it's not like the United States was without this very advanced thinking and the practitioners who wanted to do something. They just were defunded. They were just completely shut out. By 1978, 79, everything started to shift to behavioral and cognitive psychology. A whole new epoch of the bean counters. The neoliberal, there is no alternative came in. So you no longer had financing or these people able to, they could do it in special places. I'm sure Patrick practiced in the high school certain kind of radical pedagogical techniques. And, these were active discussions at the New School, especially in the 80s. How do you teach mathematics radically? How do you teach it both theoretically and practically and historically? And how do you change people's mind, etc.? So this was all in the current. The problem again is that these things were cut out because they threatened the system in a sense. It threatens this massive ideology, this massive conformity, this massive nomos, right, of the camp. This is part of the problem always. So I don't think it's just a battle between East and West or, North and South or these kind of things. I think it's always been a case of when something gets a little too close to the system, right? And in terms of really changing it, and there's some success shown, the first thing they do, they're going to trash it, right? Yeah. There are two successes in the United States for socialism: Medicare, which they're going to go after, they continually go after, and Social Security, which they, completely underfund, and how they borrow in each term of crisis from systems that are working. Medicare is 30% less in terms of medical costs. You eliminate the insurance people, you eliminate the middleman, right, in a way, and you give, care to all. So I think it's also a question of, I don't like this word, but the state policy and what happens in terms of the culture at large. It's not like you didn't have the free thinkers here. I mean, you had some amazing, you had the Meminger Clinic in Kansas City. He wrote a book, The Crime of Punishment, against behaviorism, towards a long-term psychiatric, psychoanalytic approach to mental illness. Of course you had, and insurance companies would pay for this back in the day. No more, forget it. You go in to dry out for 2 days and that's it. Then they bill, like the hospital beds, you have 7 days that they carry and then you're discharged. We're going to send you to the rehab center next, right? And yeah.
What do you expect? They're not going to do any better than that.
Yeah. So this is a problem, going forward, right? In many ways, yeah.
I have a question for Arturo Forsoff. Is this book being translated?
Not that I know of. I mean, I tried to find his work in English, and I think he has an academia page, like academia.edu.
Yeah, it's in Russian, I think.
That's the problem. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think maybe one or two of his books are translated from early on that are more like he was friends with Immanuel Wallerstein, He came to Binghamton in the early 90s, and but I don't think his big books like tracing the history, like the emergence of imperial structures. He's kind of like a interesting fusion of like Giovanni Arrighi and like Brodel, plus elements of like, studying like military history and conspiracies and kind of, but unfortunately it's not translated. I mean, there are many books. There are, I think, like 12 or 13 main texts, and he has a weekly like YouTube, lectures, but they're in Russian too. So I think that's another challenge. Like some of these ideas that are not available in English, especially now, because but it would be a great project to translate some of
We
his
could
work.
fix that, Arto, with the technology. We have closed caption.
I know, but
Translation.
artificial intelligence is not, I mean, it's useful, but it's not gonna, work very well. But I think translations, yeah, it's something. I mean, I'm gonna write to him to ask him to translate like maybe the introduction, like the rough translation that I did, which is unofficial, from this lecture. I'm going to ask him if I can just translate a few articles at least, of some of the main ideas, and because they'll be interesting to share. But hopefully he'll say yes. But if not, I'll do it anyways. I mean, unofficially, but
The other thing
But-
in terms of for the reading next time, you mentioned earlier about, both of you mentioned going back to Stiegler. Is that still on the cards?
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I think it's
Because then the notion of prosthetic, because
Yeah,
I think this is something that is kind of
right. Absolutely. Yeah, we
Yeah.
can go back to there, and I'll look. I don't have the Stiegler with me, but I will in a couple of days. So I'll look and see where he actually has, at least to my judgment, the best look at prosthetic, and prosthesis in his work. I still like this critique, the critique for a new critique of political economy, particularly because of his notion of general proletarianization, which I see more and more of every minute of the day. I mean, you go to Home Depot, nobody knows what a nail is. That's the hammer, right? So anyway, it's a problem, So, much less, the
But I
difference
think
between, the heads of the nail, what kind of ones do you want, etc. So it's beyond me what's happening, yeah.
But I think I agree, and what Patrick just followed what Patrick said. I think the concept of generalized. We should go back to Stiegler for the
Yeah.
prosthetics and the generalized proletarianization, because I think that's the transitional concept.
Yes.
We are experiencing generalized proletarianization. If we agree that to be true, what is the trajectory suggestive of what's next? What's after generalized proletarianization?
Credentialized stupidity.
Is it
Put it that way.
credentialized
That's
stupidity
where we are.
or something?
We're credentialized stupidity.
Right.
The
So
a
there's
lack of trades when you
well, it's
Yeah, well, something like that. But I like
it's a de-skilling.
Yes.
That's
yeah.
taking
So
place.
Yes.
can
Just-
the de-skilling continue even more? And of course,
Well,
yes,
that's
because
why
lawyers,
standardized testing is basically, taken over the
Right,
you know,
sure.
K through 12.
and
No,
lawyers
it's
are getting
it's a trend I saw in terms of, teaching in public schools for what, 15 years, 18 years, was because education became so expensive, people would get in and get out. They didn't spend time to actually, and you talked about this, Arturo, in terms of, what's a course selection in terms of how people go through. It's like, they want to get you in and out, and that's it. And so.
yeah, and
there is no they. We're working in it, and
Oh, I know.
so
Yeah.
I still say I have hope at Bryan High School because what we're reading, the horrible part since Bloomberg came into power and maintained his power above the mandate of the city for 3 terms, and destroyed all of the industrial high schools in the Bronx, where you can't learn to be a cosmetologist, an electrician, a photographer, anything else. We're all include Rikers Island into it too, where you had 40 New York State licenses more to teach. What you're only teaching, I've been saying this for 20 years, is math, science, English, and social studies, GEDization of education, and you're not counter to 1865. It's not a question of becoming a lawyer or a doctor. It's a question of being able to know how to hold a hammer. And that's where your de-skilling is, and that's where your loss of humanity is, because people can't fix anything, and because they're not being, anyway, I talked enough. But I got my nickel's worth out of the seminar.
Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to January 17th.
Okay, we hope to give you back a dime next time. Yeah, good. Good. Yeah, we
So I think
double the investment.
yeah. So I think there's something interesting and really worthwhile to push against this notion of prosthetics from Stiegler and generalized proletarianization, because I mean, it suggests itself, because if we're talking about Homo economicus to Homo datum, if that makes sense, prosthetics is, I mean, yeah, like we're living through an age of a new prosthetic that's being invented and imposed. And then, of course, coupled with that, what happens after generalized proletarianization? Now lawyers are becoming proletarianized, and doctors, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No one's immune from that. It's generalized stupidity, Stiegler says, which is true, because there's a de-skilling, and what happens when somebody's de-skilled, but they're still alive? Well, they function as a bare life entity. They're functioning as a sufficient, you know, just barely biologically kind of minimized living creatures. They're still nominally called humans by our rules and our laws and whatever, and you know, but they're functioning as you know, biological beings now with human capacities. Is that the next stage of generalized proletarianization? And is that different from what Agamben calls bare life in a camp, in the city as a camp? In other words, are we still in Agamben's territory, or are we in a situation that's even more dire in some way that is different? But what's the difference? I don't know.
Well, it's sub-proletarian.
Look at the morons we have in DC now. I mean, these people are just stupid. I mean, stupid.
Hillary Clinton called Jake Sullivan a generational talent. He's a high watermark for Hillary Clinton. She said he's a generational talent. Can you imagine this moron that they put on stage once in a while? Yeah. I
There
mean,
was an interview
you can see the lies in the face, in the facial gestures. Like Kirby, you can read his mind by watching his jaw dropping. You know, yeah. The Navy guy, you know, who went to some South Florida university. You can imagine what he learned there. When in dumb, came out dumb too, as we like to say down south, you know, right?
Patrick, what were you saying?
No, I mean, there was an interview with a woman, I mean, who's basically, you know, fairly high up in the Biden administration. Harriman, probably the granddaughter of Averell Harriman. Anyway, and she's just going through the litany in terms of saying that the Russians are running out of weapons. They're losing the war. They've lost territory. I mean, it just and it's just taken as fact, you know, and it just is. It's anyway.
Another great group.
But it's interesting if
Avril Haines, Samantha Powers, Miss Harold, Miss Jean Pierre. You can go down the list in terms of the other side of the the gender divide. Unbelievable. Yeah.
I mean, if we follow Fursov's kind of crypto structures thesis, I don't know if he gives too much credit to these people, the ruling elites, but he does say recently in his talks, he says there's definitely a crisis in the ruling, like politically interested part of the oligarchy in the imperial core, that they've gotten dumber and thus more dangerous, and more because they don't understand the consequences of their actions fully. But according to Fursov, you know, the capitalism entered exhausted itself completely by the mid-60s, and the smart kind of politically attuned capitalists like Agnelli family that owns Fiat, like he goes through these figures, you know, the Rockefeller, you know, clan, which runs its own private intelligence agencies in Rockefeller Center, you know, analytical kind of services.
Henry Kissinger, yeah.
Right, of which Henry Kissinger was an employee, you know, in public office. So he goes through these figures and the research projects that they spawn, and you have the Treaty of Rome, and you have that document which called for in the 60s for deindustrialization, less production, less consumption, right? And that, to him, that's a signal that the smart capitalists understood that they've already exhausted this social system, and it's just going to be, and of course, there are objective reasons. He says there's, you know, once you saturate everything with consumerism, you can't keep going that system indefinitely. And once the Soviet Union fell apart, that was a God's gift sent to the capitalists, because it kicked down the can of this structural crisis for another 20 years, because once you colonize the Eastern European markets and convert them into capitalism, that'll give you another 20 years of breathing space, right? Well, you can do things the way you did up until the mid-60s and the late 60s. The Soviets, of course, imploded, shot themselves in the foot, he says, because instead of capitalizing on this revolutionary project of like building an alternative to capital, a systemic alternative. After Khrushchev, maybe starting with Khrushchev, they decided to coexist with capitalism, which means was they wanted to become capitalists, you know, the party elites. They wanted to live a life of exuberant consumption and etc. But the point is, by the time Reagan came into office, Fursev says, Reagan convened a think tank, a private secret think tank for his own. And he said, look, we want to know what's going to happen in what's the economic trend 20 years down the line. So he convened a commission, and they had like a couple of months or 6 months or whatever to come up with a report looking at the American economy and the global economy. And they said, look, we're in terminal decline because technological advances, et cetera, whatever, we need a way out of capitalism. And of course, this is Varoufakis' thesis too, that capitalists got us out of capitalism. It wasn't the revolutionary Marxists, you know? And I haven't read his book about techno-feudalism, but it seems like it is possible that we are maybe in a transitionary period away from capitalism into some other entity. We're just not fully aware of it yet because we're in it, right? We're living through it. But some of the smart people who are inside the system have been preparing for it. So you have the Treaty of Rome, which calls for deindustrialization. And then what happens 40 years later in Davos? Klaus Schwab, who's like a talking head for some of these smarter, politically inclined oligarchs, he talks about the limits to growth. It's essentially a more powerful, more forceful restating of the thesis from the 1960s. And what is the number that Schwab is talking about? He's talking about depopulation, which is the old kind of liberal solution to capitalism's problems, right? Fused with racism. So he's talking about depopulation through lesser and lesser consumption. What does it mean to consume less? And I think one of the examples he gave, I think Beryl would know, of course, much better, but one of the examples in one of Klaus Schwab's book about the ideal society of the immediate future. Actually, I don't know if it's Australia, Beryl. I think it's Argentina, like Patagonia. So in one of the books of Klaus Schwab and those people working in Davos, were like one of the models, communities for tomorrow would be like one of the Patagonia communities in Argentina, which apparently is like one of the most severe places you can live in, of like profound hardship and etc. Or Siberia, right? So it's like that's their image for what's coming next. Fursev is saying is that they're preparing public opinion essentially for an extended period of crisis marked by wars, small and large, less consumption, shortages, lower spans of life, reduced lifespans, greater illiteracy, generalized stupidity, right? And it's like, what's that?
It sounds very familiar.
Right? And it sounds, and now we're back in, right? And it sounds, and we're back in Stiegler's generalized proletarianization, you know, thesis. And it's like, the two sides are opposed on the political battle, but they're talking about the same things, you know. So, you know.
I have two things. One where you're confusing me, Arto, is proletarianization. It sounds like it's a negative. That's
It's a negative.
What is
Lenin
it?
wanted, the Bolsheviks wanted to eliminate the working class, remember? They wanted to transform the working class into something that is not a working class anymore.
But
The
it's through the work. It's through the working class.
The proletariat is
something to be.
Right. The proletariat is a condition of loss, according to Stiegler, right? That when he summarizes the word, it's a loss of fundamental abilities that you're forced to lose because of the way you're forced to live in. So it's a loss of how to do things and how to know things.
No, but
Yeah, loss
is
loss
not a
of
working
making.
class. Is not a working class hero something to be? It's the pride.
Those days are over with.
But those days are increasingly over because working class people are being forced into ever more harsh ways of surviving. They're being forced into a condition of bare life. Literal biological survival, synonymous with them being, you know, citizens and whatever. So being a working class is not a good thing in America, for example, or anywhere else. It's not a good thing. It's not a good way to live.
The part two was Beryl. I would like to hear more from you. That was all. That was my number two. hearing from you down south.
Right. What would you like to hear, George?
Anything you have to say.
I mean, one of there's several aspects of that, so much resonance. First of all, our public discourse at the moment, which relates to what Arto just said, is about the cost of living crisis. And, you know, there's a sense in which people are being schooled to accept less. There's, you know, food banks are kind of growing. People are defaulting on mortgages. We've got a housing bubble like you never saw. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And in relation to the maritime stuff, our government has just invested something like $370 billion in nuclear submarines, which are going to be built by the Americans and the British. And it's going to enable us to participate in American actions in the South China Sea. You know, I mean, the one bright thing that's happened in the last week is that the government actually declined an invitation to send a warship to the Red Sea. And of course, the opposition, the conservative opposition, is jumping up and down about this and saying, well, you know, we expect the Americans to come to our aid. We've got to reciprocate. You know, don't start me on Australian politics.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more.
But George, I think, and just like to follow on what Beryl was saying, this kind of, you know, you got to expect less, you know, which was against the trajectory of the entire 20th century and the 19th, you know, whatever. You got to expect more, right? Decolonization, you know, we're into space and, you know, whatever. But I think these fundamental categories we need to rehash and rethink, like, what is the proletariat? What is the meaning of the working class? Are we over fetishizing the working class? You know, what is imperialism? What is racism? I mean, what is racism when we read Agamben is far more terrifying than what is racism when we listen to the you know, to the other definitions of racism, you know. So I think it's good to rehash some of the fundamental categories and then decide if it's worth some, after we do the rehashing, okay, these categories we can keep using because they're meaningful in describing the world that it actually is. The way we talk about these other categories, we need to change because they're meaningless the way we talk about them now. So I think that's an important exercise, because I think in my experience, the left, which is a totally meaningless word at this point because the left can mean anything, but the systemic anti-capitalism in the United States, as I've witnessed it, suffers from terrible kind of weakness in the conceptual apparatus. It's obsolete, completely obsolete, and completely outclassed by the political enemy, you know, where they can appropriate our ideas, but we can't do the same. We can't protect our ideas, and we can't do the same to theirs. We can't subvert their ideas, as Pasolini would have said, as effectively as it was done in the previous decades. Why is that happening? You know, and you know,
I say, yes, we can.
of course we can, but we're not doing it at all. You know?
Thanks, Phil.
2008, huh, George? Yeah, I hear you. Yes, we can. Yeah, 15 years ago, we're running from that slogan.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, this was very good. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, Patrick, you wanted to say something?
No. I just, yeah, I'm good.
Okay. But I think Arto's right. I mean, you know, in a way, we need this. We need, you know, to really try to figure out new concepts. I mean, what can be radicalized out of the past, right? In terms of giving, you know, a new flesh, if you will, a new force to this kind of language that can be very powerful, but at the same time, what is adequate to our object? What really ultimately are these domains we're studying, and what kind of language can we develop, analytical and critical language, to engage it? I mean, you know, we can't talk about the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. forever. You know, we can't talk about, you know.
And as Michael's teacher, one of his teachers, Schurman, you know, the great German philosopher, he in one of his books, he gives an example of what Marx did, right? If we're talking about this tradition, he said Marx in the middle of the 19th century, none of the astute political observers in his day, in his society, saw or even thought of the proletariat and of the working class as the future engine of revolutionary transformational politics. There was absolutely no reason to think that. But Marx and Engels and, you know, they basically invented, they elevated, they
They
anointed,
invented the concept, yeah.
they invented the concept, and
They
by
did it.
promoting the working class of Europe, which was very small, right, in relation to the total population, especially in Germany, right, or in France, they basically said, look, how do we fight against the bourgeoisie? Who's going to do it? There's nobody do it. It's a largely peasant society with emerging like industrialization and whatever. Well, let's project this system 100 years into the future or 50 years into the future. So Schurman said they made a strategic political move. They annoyed it. They didn't invent the working class. It was already there, but they assigned to it a politics that it didn't have. And they organized around that idea. They said, we're gonna crush the bourgeoisie. Who's gonna do it? It's their negation, the working class. But there was no conditions for that, right? And there was no political ideas about it. Well, they invented those ideas, right? So it was a political strategy can also be at times invented, not because of an actual situation that exists on the ground. No, it could also be by carefully understanding what's happening and the rules of the game, of the system, and projecting ahead and going on a limb, right? And then Lenin did the same thing. He made an alliance of peasants, intellectuals, and the working class. The Russian Revolution was, as we know, done by an alliance of the bourgeoisie, the aristocracy, elements of the bourgeoisie, elements of the aristocracy. Dzerzhinsky, today is the anniversary of the formation of the Soviet secret police, right? Dzerzhinsky, the first director of the Soviet secret police, was a Polish aristocrat who happened to be a revolutionary Marxist or a class traitor in the language of, who was it, Amilcar Cabral, who came up with the concept of
he's one of
class
many.
traders.
But
He's
yeah,
one of many.
He was
Right?
many.
So
He
the
just-
alliance, the political alliance of members of the aristocracy, intelligentsia, the working class, and the peasantry over a certain ideas of a better future created that revolution. And it created every revolution in the 20th century, right? People think what? Some people think that the Cuban Revolution was the product of industrial labor alone. Far from it. It was college students, right? I mean, we know the history. So why is it that we still talk about anti-capitalist struggle through the language of the working class alone? When it never happened that way.
Alone, I'll go with you, but you know, as part of it, most certainly.
If you listen to the song carefully, George, you begin to think it through. You're a working class hero, something to be, but you're still, you know, effing peasants as far as I can see. Yeah, so think about that too.
Of course.
Why what Arto says
I'm
is
not
important.
concerned with their thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think swaying in new political ideas of members of the capitalist class is just as important, if not more important, than organizing at work or in parallel. You know, and I think that's the weakness. I mean, Michael used to say that in the 1980s, he used to go to Christmas parties on Wall Street with friends, and he would hear like senior level Wall Street people, out of 10 people in the room who were senior executives, 3 of them had read Marx or were Marxists themselves.
Right.
In a way.
70s, not 80s. 80s.
Or in the 70s, yeah.
But late 70s, it was still going on. Yeah. The best commodity traders knew Marx inside and out. Right? They knew wheat futures by analyzing the conditions. You know, they knew globalization very well, where the next, you know, upsurge would come from, what would push prices. Very, very, very good at this stuff. Yeah.
Hudson talked about the lunchtime reading group going through the 3rd volume of Capital.
Yes.
When he worked on Wall Street.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Hudson is great for that particular
good.
reason too,
Really
right? Like
good.
he really
Yeah.
knows, he straddles both worlds, you know, he understands
Yeah.
everything, the whole
He
picture.
worked there. You know, he had
Yeah.
Mhm.
actually made a living that way and wrote Super Imperialism while he was working. I think it was for Bache and Company or EF, one of those firms that went out of business. He was a employee for one
So
of
it
those.
seems like figuring out how to make inroads in terms of the ideas. Like, look, are you satisfied with what's going on? I mean, this could literally is a conversation in one of those lunchrooms, right? Like, what is going on? Things were falling apart.
Right.
You know, here's a proposition. Why? Oh, you think it's good? Well, let's think about it. Let's talk to people. I mean, these kinds of things that happen routinely, right? And Michael Hudson's tenure, right, on Wall Street, and I'm sure there are many examples, ceased happening because the left atrophied too. I mean, we're, you know,
Well, the left became very moralistic too. It became,
Yeah.
we're right. You know, this is a real problem on the left. This kind of moral high ground, we're right. You know, people shouldn't be exploited. This kind of sentimentality that's out of, you know, really out of the league. Marx had none of that. You know, there's not a drop of sentimentality in Marx, you know, in that sense, you know, in many ways. So that's important to remember too, that the left became kind of a moral doctrine, you know, it's the moral Marxism instead of really, you know, I mean, look, the Communist Party in the US used to assign people that were good at mathematics to go work on Wall Street so that they could build money for the party, right? In a sense. And also, you know, get inside. They were assigned down there. Yeah. I mean, this is very, very important to keep this in mind. Yeah, going forward. Yeah.
Getting late and I'm gonna have to go. I'd like to hear from Sebastian maybe before I go.
He's here.
Sure. What'd you like to hear about?
I guess at the barrel, anything you have to say.
Okay, from the Canadian perspective, to go on what well, I guess what she was mentioning politically up here, I just heard news that Trudeau released dental care for people 87 and up. So that's ridiculous. And then
Do they have any left?
I mean, their teeth really are
False teeth.
falling
Yeah.
out.
Yeah,
Complete
so that's great. Now we have
replacement, too much, right?
so technically we have dental care. We should be really grateful, right? So there you go. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, it was some kind of gesture that Trudeau did with something to do with Palestine. That I forget though, but it was something ridiculous. And but to go on what you guys were talking about with computers and such, or technology and so on. I found a lot of things fascinating, and it got me thinking a lot about, because I do a lot of stuff with computers, and part of me, I'm in between the potential of technology and its emancipatory power and its potential to liberate us, but it's mostly used by the upper class to dominate us and control us, steal our time. And so when we go through these lectures, seminars, yeah, it kind of gets me thinking more about those kinds of things. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Sebastian, if I could add to that, that's,
Sure.
you know, Wiener really thought that, you know, cybernetics and the cybernetic revolution was emancipatory. They really believe this in some way. You know, I just want to say that, not that I'm in disagreement with you. I mean, most of the Marxists think that if technology is in the right hands, it can provide a liberatory function. But, you know, Wiener, and I'm not so sure about Bateson. Bateson seemed to have more of a controlling thing. I guess Margaret Mead's not here. We can't ask her. You know, that was his wife. So she's not with us anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, maybe we can ask Catherine, the daughter, you know. Anyway. Yeah, but yeah, it's great to see you, Sebastian. Sebastian
Likewise, thanks.
came to Costos last year and absorbed everything. I could tell he was always thinking through things, you know, the strong silent type that's absorbing and synthesizing. Yeah. And we took the boat back to Piraeus. I remember that vividly. You know, we took the overnight boat from the far southern island all the way back to Piraeus. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. So, yeah. So, and Jeff, I'm sure Boeing's getting very rich during this period, huh? Profits are up, huh? With,
Well, they're having quite a few problems. They having trouble with their airplanes. They keep having to not
yeah, compete with Airbus, huh?
Falling out of the sky.
Yeah.
cancel their strategy organization. I knew people getting laid off because too much thinking is no good if it's not done in the proper levels of the company.
I see. Yeah, interesting.
By the way, I had an interesting run-in with Agamben this week. I didn't
Okay.
realize he'd written a theological book,
Oh.
Pilate and Jesus, where he reviewed the trial of Jesus with Pontius Pilate, and he claimed that Pilate did not condemn Jesus. He left that to the Pharisees, the Jehudim, and it caused a number of other people to try to refute him.
I see. Yeah. Agamben played in the Pasolini film, by the way, The Gospel of St. Matthew.
Really?
Played one of the characters. Yes, he did. They were very good friends with Pasolini. Yeah, very good. Agamben, Pasolini, Negri, they're all associated with each other. Yeah.
Theologians had to write a book trying to refute Agamben's theory about the
Okay.
Pilate.
Okay, interesting. Okay, yeah. He didn't wash his hands and cried. And
One of Agamben's thesis, which makes sense to me, was he was not a free acting individual. He was the representative of the Roman Empire, and he had to act what was most interesting in the interest of the empire, not in terms of a theological.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. Have a happy New Year, Patrick. Yeah, I know he's going. Yeah. Anyway, so maybe on Punctius Pilate, we should get out of Dodge.
Time to leave.
Yeah, time to leave. You know? But Arto, stay on for a second. I just wanted to run
Sure.
something by you. Yeah. But thank you, everybody, and happy holidays.
Yeah.
And great
Happy
New Year.
holiday.
And we'll see you.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Yeah,
Happy
soon.
capitalismus.
Yeah. Yeah,
Stay
and we're
well,
gonna try to
everybody.
do the SART with interactive technology so that we
Bye-bye.
can incorporate a lot of the people that come by Zoom. We're going to try to do the SART at a reasonable time, and everybody can then, yeah. Okay. So thank you.